The streets of San Francisco buzzed with life on a crisp autumn afternoon. The hum of electric engines blended with the distant murmur of conversations and the occasional honk of a car horn. At the heart of this modern symphony, Elon Musk's sleek Tesla motorcade glided smoothly along Market Street, drawing the curious gazes of pedestrians and tourists alike. Inside the lead vehicle, Elon leaned back in his seat, scrolling through his tablet. His day was packed: meetings with investors, a visit to the SpaceX satellite office, and a keynote address at a tech summit. It was business as usual, or so it seemed. Then, it happened. A loud bang reverberated as the motorcade screeched to an unexpected halt. Startled, Elon looked up just in time to see a young girl standing in the middle of the street, her clothes tattered, her hair unkempt, and her face a canvas of dirt and despair. Her small hands clutched a battered backpack as she stared defiantly at the vehicles, her gaze unwavering despite the chaos around her. "Sir, it's a girl," Elon's driver said, his voice tinged with concern. "Should we call security?" Elon's mind raced. 1,000 thoughts collided in his head, but one rose above the rest. Why is she here? What does she want? "No," Elon said firmly, already reaching for the door handle. "I'll handle this." The bodyguards exchanged nervous glances, but stepped aside as their boss exited the car. Cameras from nearby pedestrians were already capturing the scene, their lenses trained on the billionaire in his tailored suit standing before the homeless girl. "What's your name?" Elon asked, his tone gentle but direct. The girl hesitated, clutching her backpack tighter. "Sarah," she said, her voice barely audible. "Why are you here, Sarah?" he pressed, his eyes scanning her for clues. She looked no older than 14, her frame fragile and malnourished. "I need help," she replied, her voice cracking. "Not for me, for my sister." The crowd around them grew, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Elon glanced back at his team, who were clearly uneasy with the delay. But he didn't care. This was bigger than his schedule. "Where is your sister?" Elon asked. Sarah's lips trembled, but she pointed toward a nearby alley. "She's sick. I don't know what to do." In that moment, something shifted inside Elon. This wasn't a publicity stunt or a fleeting moment of charity. This was a human being, desperate and out of options. "Take me to her," he said, his voice resolute. The murmurs turned into audible gasps as Elon Musk, one of the most powerful men in the world, followed a homeless girl into the shadows of the city. And the world watched, holding its breath. As Sarah led Elon through the narrow alley, the cacophony of the bustling city seemed to fade. His thoughts wandered, pulled back to a time and place far removed from the shiny Teslas and corporate boardrooms of his present life. He remembered his childhood in Pretoria, South Africa. The dusty streets, the warm sun beating down on his face, and the lingering scent of his mother's cooking wafting from their modest kitchen. Elon's upbringing had been far from easy. His parents divorced when he was young, and he often felt like an outsider, misunderstood and isolated. But one memory stood out among the rest: his mother, May, stopping to give food to a beggar outside their local grocery store. Elon had been just 7 years old, tugging impatiently at her sleeve. "Why are you helping him?" he had asked, frustrated that she was delaying their errands. "Because we can't, Elon," May had replied, crouching down to his level. "If we're able to help someone in need, it's our duty to do so. One day, you'll understand." Her words echoed in his mind now, decades later, as he followed Sarah deeper into the alley. It was dimly lit and smelled of damp concrete and stale food. Elon's polished shoes felt out of place on the uneven ground, but he pressed on without hesitation. "Is it much farther?" he asked gently, breaking the silence. Sarah shook her head, her eyes darting nervously toward the shadows. "No, she's just over there." Elon's bodyguards trailed at a distance, their expressions a mix of concern and disapproval. They were used to protecting him from risks, not walking headfirst into them. As they turned a corner, Elon saw a makeshift shelter constructed from cardboard boxes and old blankets. Inside, a younger girl, no older than 8, lay curled up, her face pale and her breathing shallow. "This is Emily," Sarah said, kneeling beside her sister. Her voice cracked as she added, "She's been sick for days." I tried to get medicine, but I couldn't. Elon knelt, his sharp suit brushing against the dirty ground. He reached out carefully, feeling Emily's forehead. It was burning hot. She has a fever, he said, standing quickly. We need to get her to a doctor. No, Sarah cried, grabbing his arm. Her eyes brimmed with tears. They'll take her away from me. They'll put us in different homes. Elon hesitated, understanding the fear in her voice. He knew the system could be unforgiving, especially for kids like Sarah and Emily. He took a deep breath. I'll make sure that doesn't happen. You have my word. Sarah looked at him, searching for any hint of insincerity, but all she saw was resolve. Slowly, she nodded. Elon turned to his team. Get a car ready. We're taking both of them to the hospital. Sir, with all due respect, one of the bodyguards began, but Elon silenced him with a glance. This isn't up for debate, he said firmly. As the team sprang into action, Elon knelt beside Sarah again. You're brave, you know that, he said softly. Looking out for your sister like this, it takes strength. Sarah blinked back tears. I don't know what else to do. You're doing the best you can, Elon assured her. And now you're not alone. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah allowed herself to hope. That night, as the Tesla carrying Sarah and Emily sped toward the nearest hospital, Elon stared out the window, his mind heavy with thoughts. May's words echoed once more. If we're able to help someone in need, it's our duty to do so. Elon didn't know it yet, but this encounter would change not only Sarah and Emily's lives, but his own too. The hospital was a stark contrast to the cold, unforgiving streets Sarah and Emily had called home. White walls gleamed under bright fluorescent lights, and the scent of antiseptic lingered in the air. Elon had ensured they were taken to a private facility where they would receive immediate care. Emily was whisked away by a team of doctors, leaving Sarah standing awkwardly in the waiting room. She clutched her battered backpack, her knuckles white from the strain. Elon approached her gently, handing her a bottle of water. She's in good hands, he said, his voice calm but firm. The doctors will take care of her. Sarah nodded but didn't speak. Her mind was spinning, replaying the events that had brought her to this moment. She wasn't used to people helping her without wanting something in return. Elon sat down beside her, giving her space to speak if she wanted to. After a long silence, Sarah finally found her voice. We used to have a home, she began, staring at the floor. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Then the accident happened. Elon remained quiet, letting her continue at her own pace. Mom and Dad were driving back from work, Sarah said, her voice trembling. There was a truck. It didn't stop at the light. They didn't make it. Her words hung heavy in the air. Elon felt a pang of sorrow, but he knew better than to interrupt. They took us in, me and Emily, Sarah continued, her hands tightening around her backpack straps. A foster home, but it wasn't safe. The people there didn't care about us. They only wanted the money. Elon's jaw tightened. He had heard stories about the broken foster care system, but hearing it firsthand from a child was different. I ran away with Emily, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought we'd be better off on our own. How long have you been out here? Elon asked softly. Almost a year, she replied, tears brimming in her eyes. I try to find food, to keep us safe, but it's so hard. Elon leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. You shouldn't have had to go through any of this. It's not your fault. Sarah shook her head. Maybe if I had been stronger, I could have protected Emily better. Elon reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. You're stronger than you think, Sarah. You've done more for Emily than most people could. But now, you don't have to do it alone. For the first time, Sarah looked up at him, her guard beginning to lower. Why are you helping us? She asked, suspicion flickering in her eyes. Elon hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because I can, he said, echoing the lesson his mother had taught him. And because everyone deserves a chance to get back on their feet. Just then, a doctor approached them, clipboard in hand. Mr. Musk, Emily is stable, the doctor said. She was severely dehydrated and malnourished, but with proper care, she'll recover. Sarah exhaled a shaky breath, her relief palpable. "Can I see her?" she asked. "Of course," the doctor replied, leading her down the hallway. Elon watched as Sarah disappeared into Emily's room. He leaned back in his chair, his mind churning. This wasn't just about two sisters. It was a window into a larger problem, one he couldn't ignore. As the minutes ticked by, Elon began to formulate a plan. He wasn't sure what it would look like yet, but one thing was certain. Sarah and Emily's story would not end here. This was only the beginning. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines monitoring Emily's condition. Sarah sat by her sister's side, holding Emily's tiny hand as she slept. She hadn't left her spot since being allowed into the room. The doctors assured her that Emily would recover, but Sarah's heart still felt heavy with worry. Outside in the corridor, Elon leaned against the wall, speaking in hushed tones with his assistant, James. "Sir, I've reached out to social services," James said. "They can arrange temporary housing for the girls and—" "No," Elon interrupted, his voice firm. "I'm not handing them over to a broken system that failed them in the first place." James hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "What do you suggest, then? They can't stay here indefinitely." Elon folded his arms, his mind working at lightning speed. "We'll find a private solution," he said. "A safe place where they can stay together while we figure this out." "Sir, with respect, this is highly unorthodox," James said. "The media is already swarming the hospital. If we don't manage this carefully, it could turn into a PR nightmare." Elon gave him a sharp look. "Let them swarm," he said. "I didn't get here by following the playbook. I'm doing what's right, not what's convenient." James sighed but nodded. He had worked with Elon long enough to know that when he made up his mind, there was no changing it. Elon re-entered the hospital room, his gaze softening as he saw Sarah sitting protectively beside Emily. She looked up at him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and guarded hope. "How's Emily?" he asked. Sarah shrugged. "The doctors say she'll be okay, but I don't know what happens next. What if they take her away from me?" Elon pulled up a chair and sat beside her. "They won't," he said firmly. "Not if I can help it." Sarah's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" Elon leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I'm going to make sure you and Emily have a safe place to stay. Somewhere you can both recover and figure out your next steps without worrying about being separated." Sarah stared at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Why would you do that? You don't even know us." "Because everyone deserves a second chance," Elon replied. "And because I know what it's like to feel alone and out of options." For a moment, Sarah didn't know what to say. The sincerity in his voice was disarming. She had spent so long fighting to survive that she had forgotten what it felt like to trust someone. Finally, she asked, "What's the catch?" Elon smiled faintly. "No catch. Just one condition. When you're ready, I want you to think about how you can use your experience to help someone else. Deal?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Deal." "Good," Elon said, standing. "Now, let me handle the logistics. You focus on Emily." As Elon left the room, his mind raced with possibilities. He had resources, money, connections, influence, but this wasn't just about writing a check. It was about creating a solution that could address the root of the problem, not just the symptoms. By the time he reached the hospital lobby, the plan was already forming. He would arrange for temporary housing for the girls while launching an initiative to support homeless youth on a larger scale. The media was waiting for him outside, cameras flashing as he stepped through the hospital doors. Reporters shouted questions, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony. "Elon, who is the girl? Is this a publicity stunt? What's your plan?" Elon paused on the steps, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. Then, with the calm confidence that had become his trademark, he addressed them. "Her name is Sarah," he said. "She and her sister Emily represent a problem we can no longer ignore. Tonight, I'm not just helping them. I'm committing to finding real solutions for kids like them, starting now." The crowd fell silent for a moment, stunned by the boldness of his statement. Then the questions began again, but Elon didn't stay to answer. He had work to do, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't about building rockets or cars. It was about building hope. The private housing arranged by Elon's team was nothing like Sarah expected. She and Emily were driven to a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood outside the city. The house was small but warm, its walls painted in cheerful tones, and its furniture simple yet comfortable. As they stepped inside, Sarah couldn't help but feel uneasy. It had been so long since she had been in a place that felt safe, and the idea of trusting someone, even someone as famous as Elon Musk, felt foreign. "Is this ours?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with suspicion. "For now, yes," Elon replied, standing in the doorway. "It's temporary until we figure out the next steps. There's a caretaker, Ms. Linda, who will help with anything you need. You won't be alone." Sarah glanced around, her gaze lingering on the couch, the kitchen, and the soft, plush blankets folded neatly on the beds. Emily, still recovering but stronger now, clutched Sarah's hand tightly, her eyes wide with wonder. "This is too much," Sarah said finally, turning back to Elon. "Why are you doing all this for us?" Elon crouched to meet her eye level, his tone steady but kind. "Because no one should have to go through what you've been through, especially at your age. You've taken care of Emily on your own for so long. It's time someone took care of you." Sarah's defenses softened slightly, but her wariness remained. "What happens when you get tired of helping us? People always leave." Elon's expression grew serious. "I won't leave," he said. "Not until you're both okay. I give you my word." Sarah nodded hesitantly, unsure if she could believe him but wanting to. As Emily slept peacefully for the first time in months, Sarah wandered into the living room. She found Elon sitting on the couch, his tablet in hand, typing furiously. "What are you doing?" she asked, crossing her arms. Elon looked up, a small smile on his face. "Planning. I don't just want to help you and Emily. I want to help kids like you everywhere. But I need your input." Sarah blinked, taken aback. "My input?" "Yes," Elon said. "You've lived this. You know what it's like out there. What do kids like you need most? Housing? Food? Medical care?" "All of it," Sarah said without hesitation. "But more than that, someone who actually cares." Elon nodded thoughtfully. "Noted." Sarah hesitated before sitting on the arm of the couch. "I don't get it. You have everything, money, power. Why would you care about kids like us?" Elon set down his tablet, his gaze steady. "Because I know what it's like to feel abandoned. My childhood wasn't perfect, either. And because if I can make a difference, I should. Simple as that." Sarah studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, Elon wasn't like everyone else. "Okay," she said quietly. "If you're serious about helping, then I'll help too." Elon's smile widened. "Deal." That night, as Sarah returned to her room, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe things really could get better. Meanwhile, Elon stayed up late, sketching out ideas for what he would call the Catalyst Initiative, a program designed to provide shelter, education, and support for homeless youth. It was an ambitious plan, but if there was one thing Elon Musk was known for, it was turning ambitious plans into reality. This was only the beginning. The next morning, Elon was already on a video call in the kitchen, speaking with some of his top executives and advisors. Sarah lingered in the hallway, overhearing snippets of the conversation. A scalable solution. Start small, test it, and expand rapidly, Elon said, his tone brisk. This isn't just about charity. It's about creating a system that works. Sarah hesitated before stepping into the room. Elon glanced up, pausing the call. "Good morning," he said, gesturing toward the table. "There's breakfast. Help yourself." Sarah looked at the neatly arranged plates of pancakes, eggs, and fruit. She hadn't seen a meal like this in ages. "Thanks," she mumbled, sitting down. Elon ended his call and joined her at the table. "How's Emily?" "She's still sleeping," Sarah said, stabbing at a piece of fruit with her fork. "She needs the rest." Elon nodded. "Good. She's safe here, and she'll get better." For a moment, they ate in silence, the quiet only broken by the sound of clinking silverware. Finally, Sarah spoke up. "What were you talking about on the call?" she asked. Elon leaned back in his chair. I'm starting something called the Catalyst Initiative. It's a program to help kids like you and Emily, kids who've fallen through the cracks. It'll provide housing, education, healthcare, and support. Sarah frowned. That sounds big. It is, Elon said with a small smile. But big problems need big solutions. Sarah chewed her lip, considering his words. How do you know it'll work? People talk about helping, but nothing ever changes. That's why I need you, Elon said, his gaze steady. You've lived this. You can tell me what works and what doesn't. Sarah's eyes widened. You really want me to help? Absolutely, Elon replied. Who better to help design the solution than someone who's experienced the problem firsthand? Over the next few days, Sarah found herself drawn into Elon's world. He involved her in discussions, asking for her opinions on everything from the design of shelters to the kinds of services kids would need. At first, she felt out of place among the polished executives and tech experts, but Elon made sure her voice was heard. During one meeting, Elon pulled up a blueprint on his tablet. This is the prototype for a modular housing unit. It's compact but functional. What do you think, Sarah? Sarah studied the design carefully. It looks nice, but what about privacy? Kids like me, we're used to having nothing of our own. Even a tiny space that's just ours would mean a lot. Elon nodded, making notes. Good point. We'll add private sections to the design. By the end of the week, Sarah was beginning to feel like part of the team. She still had doubts. After all, trust didn't come easily. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like her voice mattered. One evening, Elon called Sarah and Emily into the living room. A camera crew was setting up, and Elon was adjusting his tie. What's going on? Sarah asked warily. I'm announcing the Catalyst Initiative to the world, Elon said. And I'd like you to be part of it, if you're comfortable. Sarah hesitated, glancing at Emily. I don't know. Elon crouched down, meeting her gaze. This is your story, Sarah. You don't have to share it if you're not ready, but if you do, it could inspire people to help make a difference. After a long pause, Sarah nodded. Okay, I'll do it. The camera crew began filming, and Elon introduced the initiative with his usual charisma and passion. When it was Sarah's turn to speak, her hands trembled slightly, but she took a deep breath and began. My name is Sarah, she said, her voice steadying as she continued. For a long time, it felt like no one cared about kids like me and Emily. But now, maybe things can change. Maybe we can have a future. The broadcast went viral within hours, drawing widespread attention and support. Donations flooded in, and countless people offered to volunteer. As the comments and messages poured in, Sarah felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. And Elon, watching the world respond to Sarah's story, knew they were onto something extraordinary. This wasn't just a project, it was a movement. The catalyst had begun. The launch of the Catalyst Initiative created waves far beyond what Elon had anticipated. News outlets across the country picked up the story, sharing the video of Sarah and Emily's journey. Social media lit up with hashtags like #TheCatalystEffect and #HopeForHomelessYouth. In the days that followed, donations surpassed expectations, and volunteers began signing up to contribute their time and skills. Celebrities and public figures expressed their support, pledging to join Elon in the fight against youth homelessness. Sarah couldn't believe the transformation. Just a week ago, she had been living on the streets, invisible to the world. Now, people everywhere were listening to her story. It was overwhelming, but for the first time, she felt like her pain had a purpose. With visibility came challenges. Not everyone was supportive. Some critics accused Elon of using Sarah and Emily as a publicity stunt, while others questioned the feasibility of the initiative. Elon brushed off the negativity with his usual determination, but Sarah found it harder to ignore. They don't know what they're talking about, she muttered one evening, scrolling through a thread of skeptical comments. You're right, Elon said, sitting across from her. But don't waste your energy on them. Focus on the people you're helping, the ones who need you. Sarah nodded, but the doubt lingered. Could she really make a difference? Elon and Sarah visited the first prototype of a Catalyst shelter, a sleek, modular building designed to house up to 50 people. Each resident would have their own small, private room. As Sarah had suggested, along with access to communal spaces, counseling services, and educational programs. As they toured the facility, Sarah felt a swell of pride. This could really help people, she said, running her hand along the smooth wall of a newly built room. That's the idea, Elon replied, his eyes twinkling. And this is just the beginning. The shelter was set to open in 2 weeks, and Sarah had been invited to speak at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The thought of standing in front of a crowd made her stomach churn, but she knew it was important. That night, Sarah sat outside on the porch of the temporary house Elon had arranged for her and Emily. The air was cool and still, and the stars twinkled brightly above. Elon joined her, carrying 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, handing her one of the mugs. Sarah shook her head. "Too much on my mind." "You've been through a lot," Elon said. "It's okay to take a moment to breathe." Sarah sipped her cocoa, the warmth spreading through her. "Do you ever feel like you're not good enough to do something this big?" "All the time," Elon admitted with a chuckle. "But I remind myself that perfection isn't the goal. Progress is." Sarah looked at him, surprised by his honesty. "Even you?" "Especially me," Elon said. "But here's the thing. You don't have to do it alone. We're in this together." For the first time, Sarah allowed herself to believe it. The day of the ribbon-cutting ceremony arrived, and the small courtyard of the Catalyst shelter buzzed with excitement. Reporters, donors, and community members gathered to celebrate the milestone. When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she stepped up to the microphone, her hands trembling slightly. "I never thought I'd be standing here," she began, her voice steadying as she continued. "A few weeks ago, my sister and I were living on the streets, wondering if anyone even noticed we existed. But today, I see that people do care. This shelter is proof that change is possible." The crowd erupted into applause, and Sarah felt a surge of emotion. She wasn't just telling her story, she was rewriting it. As the ribbon was cut and the doors of the shelter officially opened, Sarah watched as the first residents stepped inside, their faces lighting up with hope. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about transformation. And for Sarah, it was the start of a new chapter, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever felt invisible. The Catalyst shelter's opening was more than just a milestone. It was a spark. Within days, applications for housing and support poured in, not only from the immediate area but from cities across the country. The demand was staggering, but so was the response. Corporate sponsors stepped up, pledging resources and funds. Architects and designers volunteered their expertise to create cost-effective yet dignified housing models. Educators offered to build programs for the shelter's residents. Sarah watched it all unfold with a mix of awe and disbelief. This wasn't just a single shelter anymore. It was becoming a movement. As the Catalyst initiative grew, so did Sarah's role within it. At first, she had been hesitant to participate beyond sharing her story. But as the weeks went on, Elon encouraged her to take on more responsibility. "You've got something people connect with," Elon said one afternoon as they reviewed plans for a second shelter. "Your story isn't just about you. It's about giving others hope. You can be a leader in this." Sarah stared at the papers in front of her. They were blueprints for a new shelter, this one designed to house families. Her input was scribbled in the margins. Suggestions for shared play areas, private rooms, and spaces for counseling. "I don't know if I'm a leader," Sarah said quietly. "You already are," Elon replied. "You just don't see it yet." As the Catalyst initiative expanded, it hit its first major roadblock. A plot of land earmarked for a new shelter was suddenly caught in legal disputes. Opponents claimed the project would lower property values and attract undesirable elements to the neighborhood. The backlash was harsh, and for the first time, Sarah saw Elon frustrated. "This is ridiculous," he said during a meeting with the legal team. "We're trying to help people, not hurt anyone." Sarah, sitting in the corner of the room, felt her anger bubble over. "They don't even know what they're talking about," she said. "Do they think we wanted to be homeless? That we chose this?" Her outburst startled the room into silence. Then Elon turned to her, a determined look on his face. "You're right. And that's exactly what we need to show them." Elon organized a town hall meeting to address the community's concerns. Sarah was hesitant to attend, but knew her perspective was crucial. The meeting was tense, with residents voicing fears about crime and property values. Sarah sat quietly, her hands clenched in her lap, until one woman stood and asked, "Why should we risk our neighborhood for people who didn't take care of themselves in the first place?" Sarah rose to her feet, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "My name is Sarah," she began. "A few months ago, my little sister and I were living on the streets. Not because we wanted to, but because life didn't give us a choice. We didn't ask to lose our home. We didn't ask for people to ignore us when we needed help. But now, people are helping. And this shelter isn't about taking away from your community, it's about adding to it. It's about giving kids like my sister a chance to dream again. Don't we all deserve that?" Her words hung in the air, met with a mix of silence and murmurs. By the end of the meeting, many of the opponents had softened their stance. A few even approached Sarah to apologize. Despite the challenges, Elon remained undeterred. The incident with the land dispute solidified his belief that the Catalyst initiative needed to be more than a series of shelters. It needed to shift how society viewed homelessness. Elon brought Sarah into a brainstorming session with his team. "We need to do more than just build shelters," he said. "We need to change minds. How do we do that?" Sarah thought for a moment before speaking. "Show people the success stories. Let them see that homeless kids aren't a problem. They're just kids who need a chance." Elon grinned. "Exactly. And we'll start with yours." Sarah's heart raced. She wasn't sure she was ready for the spotlight, but she knew Elon was right. If her story could help change minds, it was worth it. The team decided to create a documentary following the Catalyst initiative from its inception to its impact. Sarah and Emily became central figures in the film, sharing their journey and their hopes for the future. Filming was both cathartic and challenging. Sarah revisited painful memories, but also saw how far she and Emily had come. Watching the footage, she realized that their story was no longer just about survival, it was about resilience. As the documentary neared completion, Elon promised it would be a game changer. "This isn't just a story," he said. "It's a call to action." Sarah nodded, a small smile on her lips. For the first time, she truly believed it. The Catalyst wasn't just changing her life. It was changing the world. The premiere of the Catalyst Initiative documentary was held in Los Angeles, drawing an audience of philanthropists, influencers, and everyday citizens eager to learn more. A red carpet stretched outside the theater, lined with flashing cameras and reporters buzzing with questions. Sarah had never experienced anything like it. She stood nervously in a modest but elegant dress that Elon's team had arranged for her, clutching Emily's hand tightly. "Just breathe," Elon said, stepping beside her. "You've got this." The theater was packed as the lights dimmed and the documentary began. The film opened with Sarah and Emily's life on the streets, juxtaposed with Elon's decision to stop his motorcade. As the narrative unfolded, the audience became visibly emotional, moved by the raw honesty of Sarah's story and the transformative power of the Catalyst initiative. When the credits rolled, the room erupted into a standing ovation. Sarah, overwhelmed with emotion, glanced at Emily, who was beaming. For the first time in years, Sarah felt truly proud of herself. The documentary was an instant sensation, trending across social media platforms and dominating the news cycle for weeks. It didn't just raise awareness, it inspired action. Donations to the Catalyst initiative surged, and communities worldwide began asking how they could replicate its success. Schools and universities included discussions about youth homelessness in their curricula, and policymakers began drafting legislation to address systemic issues contributing to homelessness. Sarah found herself thrust into the role of an advocate, speaking at conferences and participating in panels. Though public speaking still made her nervous, she embraced the opportunity to share her story and inspire change. Amid the whirlwind of attention, Sarah never lost sight of her ultimate goal, providing Emily with a stable, happy life. Emily, now healthier and attending school regularly, began to thrive. One evening, she came home with a bright smile and a drawing clutched in her hands. "It's a house," Emily explained, showing Sarah the colorful sketch. "For us and all the kids who don't have one." Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat. "It's beautiful," she said, pulling Emily into a hug. The drawing became a symbol for Sarah, a reminder of why she was fighting so hard. Elon's team worked tirelessly to expand the Catalyst initiative. They partnered with local governments and nonprofits to streamline the construction of shelters and create programs for education and job training. Elon also introduced a tech-driven approach, using AI to predict at-risk youth populations and intervene before homelessness became a reality. "We're not just reacting to the problem," Elon said during a strategy meeting. "We're solving it before it happens." Sarah was amazed by the scale of the operation. "Do you think we can really do all this?" she asked one day. "We can," Elon replied firmly. "And we will." While the Catalyst initiative flourished, Sarah continued her personal journey. With Elon's encouragement, she enrolled in online classes, determined to build a better future for herself and Emily. One evening, as she worked on an essay, she paused to reflect on how far they had come. The girl who once doubted her worth was now helping to lead a movement. It was surreal, but it was real. At a press conference a few months later, Elon made a surprise announcement. "We're establishing the Catalyst Academy, a program designed to help young leaders like Sarah develop the skills to continue this work for generations to come," he said. Sarah was stunned when Elon turned to her. "And our first student and future mentor will be Sarah herself," he added, grinning. The room erupted into applause, and Sarah felt tears welling up. She hadn't just found her voice, she had found her purpose. As Sarah embraced her role at the Catalyst Academy, the initiative continued to grow, reaching cities around the world. More and more young people shared their stories, inspired by Sarah and Emily's journey. Through the ups and downs, Sarah remained grounded. She knew the fight wasn't over, but she also knew they were making a difference. And as she tucked Emily into bed each night, she reminded her sister of one simple truth: we're not invisible anymore. We're part of something bigger. The Catalyst wasn't just a movement, it was a revolution, and it was just getting started. Months passed, and the Catalyst initiative continued to spread, its impact reaching countries far beyond the United States. Local governments, nonprofits, and community organizations started adapting the model, building shelters, offering educational programs, and empowering young people who had been overlooked for too long. But with growth came the growing pains. Managing a global initiative from the confines of the offices in California required more than just Elon's genius. It required a team of dedicated individuals who believed in the mission as much as he did. Sarah, now entrenched in the Catalyst Academy and traveling regularly to speak about her experiences, had a new understanding of the power of collaboration. Her role had evolved from a symbol of hope to one of leadership and mentorship, and she was determined to ensure the movement stayed true to its roots. In one of her speaking engagements, Sarah shared her story with an audience in London. "Homelessness doesn't have borders," Sarah told the crowd, "and neither does the need for change." The room was filled with tears, as many listeners had never imagined how close they were to the issue. Parents, teachers, and activists stood up to share their own stories. Stories of family members who had struggled or young people who had fallen through the cracks. It was in London that Sarah met Maria, a social worker who had been working in homeless youth shelters for over a decade. Maria approached Sarah after the talk. "You know," Maria began, "what you're doing with the Catalyst initiative is powerful, but we need to do more to teach these young people life skills beyond just surviving. We need to empower them with tools to dream and to build." Sarah's heart raced at the idea. It wasn't just about housing anymore. It was about providing the support necessary to give young people the confidence and ability to shape their futures. When Sarah returned to California, she shared the idea with Elon. "Maria's right," Sarah said, her voice full of determination. "We need to expand our focus. The Catalyst initiative can't just be about shelters. It's about giving youth the tools to rebuild their lives from the ground up." Elon was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "We'll make it happen." A few months later, the Catalyst initiative launched a new component, the Life Skills program. The goal was to offer mentorship, vocational training, financial literacy, and leadership development for young people in the shelters. Sarah was overjoyed as she watched the first group of participants walk through the doors. These were kids who had been told for so long that they were nothing. But now, they were being told something different. They were being given the opportunity to create. One evening, after a session on leadership, Sarah pulled one of the participants aside. a 17-year-old named Lucas. "Do you ever think about what you want to do with your life?" Sarah asked him gently. Lucas looked at her, a bit sheepish. "I never thought I could do anything, honestly." "Well," Sarah said with a smile, "what would you want to do if there were no limits?" Lucas' face lit up. "I want to be a graphic designer. I want to help companies create logos and advertisements." Sarah smiled. "That's a great dream. And with the Life Skills program, we're going to help you get there." Even as things seemed to be moving forward, new obstacles began to appear. Some communities that had initially embraced the Catalyst initiative started to push back again. In cities where the initiative had been implemented, reports of rising property prices and tensions between residents and new shelter populations started to surface. Some argued that the presence of shelters was driving up crime, while others worried about the long-term sustainability of the program. Elon and his team held a series of town halls and meetings, and Sarah was there to speak as always. "We didn't come here to take," she said in one meeting. "We came here to build, to give young people like me a chance to show you who we are. Not as burdens, but as contributors. I'm living proof of that. We've been told we're problematic, but we're not. We are the solution." Her words hit home for many. Though the issue was complex, Sarah's personal testimony continued to resonate, reinforcing the idea that the Catalyst initiative was more than just a project. It was a movement toward long-term systemic change. One day, while visiting one of the new shelters in New York City, Sarah received a call that would change the trajectory of the movement once again. "Sarah, it's Elon." His voice crackled through the phone. "I've been thinking a lot about our next step, and I've got an idea. I think it's time we take the Catalyst initiative to the next level." Sarah was quiet, listening intently. "I'm talking about making it a global, self-sustaining enterprise," Elon continued. "We're going to build an endowment fund to ensure that this initiative lasts long-term, and we're going to partner with world governments to make sure youth homelessness is no longer a problem that we just deal with. We're going to eradicate it." Sarah's heart raced. This was it, the final step in a journey that had begun with a chance encounter at a motorcade. "Let's do it," Sarah said, her voice filled with newfound resolve. With that, the Catalyst initiative was no longer just a program. It was becoming a global movement, one that would change the world forever. Elon's vision was audacious. His plan to make the Catalyst initiative a self-sustaining global movement wasn't just about creating more shelters. It was about disrupting the system entirely. He wanted to tackle the root causes of homelessness, systemic poverty, lack of education, mental health issues, and access to opportunities, and offer long-term, actionable solutions. Sarah was deeply involved in the planning of the new initiative. She sat in countless meetings, discussing policy changes, funding strategies, and global partnerships. Her voice was no longer just the voice of someone who had been homeless. She was now a key player in shaping a future where no one would have to experience what she had. The endowment fund that Elon proposed would allow the Catalyst initiative to expand into countries with high homelessness rates, particularly focusing on youth. With the backing of major global philanthropists, corporations, and even governments, the plan quickly gained momentum. Elon announced it to the world, and the response was overwhelming. The day the global launch was announced, the world's media turned its focus on the Catalyst initiative. Sarah found herself in front of cameras once again, but this time, she wasn't just sharing her story. She was helping to lead a movement. "This is about more than just shelter," Sarah said at the press conference. "This is about changing the way the world thinks about homelessness. It's not a problem to be hidden away. It's an opportunity to be solved. If we want to truly make an impact, we need to make sure every young person has access to education, housing, and the support they need to succeed." The crowd erupted in applause. It felt surreal, but Sarah knew that the work was just beginning. One of the key components of the new phase of the Catalyst initiative was a global leadership training program designed to equip young people with the skills they needed to lead their own communities. Sarah had already seen how powerful the Life Skills program was in helping young people understand their own potential, but this new initiative would go even further. It would provide the tools, resources, and mentorship needed to help youth become changemakers. The training program was divided into multiple stages. It began with core values such as empathy, leadership, and collaboration, followed by more practical courses in business, technology, and social entrepreneurship. The goal wasn't just to prepare them for a job. It was to inspire them to create their own businesses or start their own projects that could continue to support the initiative long after they graduated. Sarah had been working closely with the program's mentors, and she was proud of the young leaders who had already emerged. One of them, a 19-year-old named Mark, had been living in one of the shelters just a year earlier. Now, he was a mentor in the program, helping new recruits learn the ropes of leadership. "I never thought I'd be in this position," Mark said during one of their weekly meetings. "But seeing what the Catalyst Initiative has done for me, it's inspired me to give back." Sarah smiled, watching the young leaders interact with each other. It was moments like this that reminded her why she fought so hard to help others. In the months that followed, the Catalyst Initiative began to expand rapidly. Shelters were being constructed in over 20 countries, each with its own set of challenges, but all united under the common goal of eradicating youth homelessness. In India, a shelter was being built to support young girls who had been trafficked or abandoned. In Kenya, a program focused on providing agricultural training for homeless youth had begun. In Europe, a network of safe houses for LGBTQ+ youth was established to ensure they had a safe space to turn to when rejected by their families. Each location presented its own set of unique obstacles, cultural, economic, and logistical. But the principles of the Catalyst Initiative remained the same: compassion, support, and empowerment. Sarah traveled to many of these locations, meeting with local leaders and offering guidance, but the work was still overwhelming. The global scale of the operation was immense, and at times, Sarah felt like she couldn't keep up. But with each new shelter opening and each new life touched, she was reminded of the impact they were having. Despite the external success of the Catalyst Initiative, Sarah was facing her own personal struggle. Emily, who had grown into a young teenager, was struggling with the weight of their shared past. The bright, ambitious girl who had drawn pictures of homes was now grappling with the trauma of her own experiences. Emily had begun to withdraw, spending more time in her room, avoiding social situations, and refusing to talk about her feelings. "Mom," she said one evening, "I don't want to be in the spotlight anymore. I just want to be normal." Sarah's heart ached. She understood. Emily had been through so much more than any child should ever have to endure. But Sarah also knew that Emily wasn't the same little girl who had been homeless. She had grown, and the strength that had been built in her wasn't something that could be erased. "I know, sweetheart," Sarah said softly, sitting beside her. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to. You've already done something incredible by being brave." Emily looked up at her mother, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. "I just want to be happy. I want to forget what happened." "You won't ever forget, honey," Sarah replied. "But what happened doesn't define who you are. You are so much more than that. You're stronger than you know." The conversation didn't solve everything, but it was a start. Sarah knew that as they both navigated this journey, they would do it together. As the year drew to a close, the Catalyst Initiative was facing its biggest challenge yet: maintaining the momentum of the global movement while addressing the emotional and mental health of those involved. Sarah understood the importance of addressing the trauma that came with homelessness, and she advocated for mental health support to be included in every shelter, not just for the residents, but for the volunteers and staff as well. It was crucial that everyone involved in the initiative received the help they needed to process their experiences and continue the work with resilience. Elon, ever the visionary, agreed. "We're not just building houses and offering food," he said. "We're healing people. And to do that, we need to make sure we're taking care of ourselves, too." This realization was a turning point for Sarah, and it marked the beginning of a new phase for the Catalyst Initiative. They weren't just tackling homelessness. They were tackling the deeper emotional and psychological wounds that accompanied it. And with that, the true healing began, for everyone. The world was changing, and Sarah had helped start that change. She knew the fight was far from over, but for the first time, she could see a future where homelessness was not a permanent state, but a challenge that could be overcome. It was just the beginning. As the years passed, the Catalyst Initiative grew into something far beyond anyone's expectations. The shelters, training programs, and educational resources that had once been a dream now spanned the globe, with millions of young lives touched and transformed. But as the initiative continued to expand, something remarkable began to happen. The ripple effect? Communities that had once been distant from the issue of homelessness began to see it differently. Ordinary citizens, teachers, business owners, parents were taking action in their own ways. Small local organizations were rising up, inspired by the movement's success, and governments around the world started to adopt policies that prioritized affordable housing, education, and mental health care. Sarah watched as the public perception of homelessness shifted. No longer was it seen as an insurmountable problem or a moral failure of individuals. It was recognized as a systemic issue that needed compassion and long-term solutions. This change in narrative was perhaps the Catalyst Initiative's greatest success. The most visible success came in the form of the Global Network, a collaborative platform where shelters, social services, nonprofits, and community organizations could share resources, ideas, and strategies. It became a space for collective problem-solving, allowing for the sharing of best practices, success stories, and innovative solutions. Countries that had initially been skeptical of the Catalyst Initiative began to see the results. In places like Brazil, where economic inequality had been rampant, the government began investing in programs to help homeless youth reintegrate into society. In Eastern Europe, nations like Romania and Bulgaria, who had little infrastructure for helping homeless populations, started to see the impact of targeted programs that provided not just shelter, but a path forward for young people. "We're not just saving lives," Sarah said during one of her keynote speeches. "We're changing the way people live. We're building a future where opportunity is accessible to all, regardless of where you start." For Elon, the success of the Catalyst Initiative was more than a personal victory. It was the culmination of his belief in using technology and innovation to solve the world's toughest problems. As the initiative expanded, Elon began investing in new technologies that could further help youth at risk, particularly in the fields of education and healthcare. "Technology is the key to unlocking potential," Elon often said. "If we can give young people the tools to learn, to think, to innovate, they can change the world." Elon funded the creation of educational programs that offered online courses, virtual mentorship, and even technical workshops for young people in the shelters. The goal was to provide them not only with basic education, but with access to cutting-edge fields such as coding, artificial intelligence, and sustainable energy. These programs allowed young people, regardless of their past, to get a foot in the door of industries that were shaping the future. Sarah's role evolved as well. With the global network of the Catalyst Initiative now thriving, Sarah became more of a strategic leader. Her focus was on building partnerships with governments, businesses, and nonprofits, helping to connect the dots between different efforts to end youth homelessness. But even as she thrived professionally, she never lost sight of the people who had been her motivation from the beginning. Emily, now 16, had made significant progress in her personal journey. After attending a series of therapy sessions, she began to feel more comfortable sharing her experiences. Her healing process was still ongoing, but she was no longer hiding from her past. She was confronting it head-on. "I want to help other kids like me," Emily said one evening as they sat on the couch together. "I want to be part of something bigger." And Sarah knew that one day, Emily would. Despite all the progress, there were still political obstacles. In some countries, resistance to progressive policies on homelessness remained strong. The debate around government funding for such initiatives was heated, with critics arguing that resources should be spent elsewhere. There were also discussions about the balance between providing shelter and enabling dependency. Elon, however, was unshaken by the opposition. He saw the opposition as an opportunity to engage in dialogue, to shift mindsets, and to prove that investing in young people was not just morally right, but economically viable. "There will always be critics," Elon said in an interview. "But if we're going to create a sustainable future, we need to make sure no one is left behind. That means investing in people, not just as a charity, but as an investment in the workforce of tomorrow." This mindset pushed Sarah and Elon to partner with some of the world's leading economists and social scientists to create reports demonstrating the economic benefits of ending youth homelessness. The data, backed by years of research, showed that when young people were provided with stable housing, education, and career opportunities, they contributed far more to society than they ever cost. Soon, the evidence became too powerful to ignore. Governments that had been reluctant to adopt large-scale social programs began to listen. The transformation Sarah experienced over the years was as profound as the one she helped foster in others. She went from being the poster child of homelessness to becoming an influential figure in global social policy. But even as her professional life flourished, she remained deeply humble, constantly reminding herself that the real work was happening on the ground. One afternoon, while walking through one of the shelters in New York, Sarah met a young woman named Jasmine who was just beginning the life skills program. Jasmine had been living in a foster home system that failed to provide her with any real support. "I don't know if I believe in myself yet," Jasmine admitted. Sarah smiled softly. "I get it. It takes time. But I'll tell you something. I've seen kids just like you change the world. And you can too." Later that evening, as Sarah stood by the window overlooking the city, she realized that she wasn't just helping others believe in themselves. She was reminding herself that anything was possible. The shift in public opinion regarding homelessness was beginning to make a real impact. Politicians, community leaders, and everyday citizens began to see homeless youth not as an inconvenience or an eyesore, but as people who deserved an opportunity to thrive. In a world where success was often defined by wealth or status, the Catalyst Initiative was proving that the true measure of success lay in the ability to lift others up, to help people find their path, and to give them the tools to create something meaningful for themselves. And as Sarah looked out at the world that had begun to change, she knew that the fight wasn't over. But the progress was undeniable. They were winning the battle, one life at a time. The ripple effect of the Catalyst Initiative had only just begun, and it would continue to spread, touching lives in ways no one could ever have imagined. The journey was far from complete, but for the first time, Sarah could see a future where no one would ever be left behind. The months after the Catalyst Initiative's global expansion were a blur of meetings, speeches, and new partnerships. But in the midst of this whirlwind, Sarah found herself focusing more on the personal side of the journey. The transformation of her relationship with Emily was now at the forefront of her thoughts. Emily's journey had not been easy, but it was evident that she had started to heal. The therapy sessions had helped, but more than anything, it was the empowerment Emily felt through the Catalyst Initiative that made the difference. Emily wasn't just a passive recipient of aid anymore. She was an active part of the mission. One evening, as Sarah was preparing for another round of international calls, Emily approached her with something in her hands. "I've been thinking about this for a while," Emily said, her voice quieter than usual. She handed Sarah a folder of sketches. "I want to design some new shelters. I think I can help make them feel more like home." Sarah's heart swelled with pride. Emily had spent so many years envisioning a better world for herself, and now she was envisioning a better world for others. "I love these, Em," Sarah said, looking at the detailed drawings of what Emily envisioned for the shelters. "You know what? I think we can make this happen. Let's take your designs to the team." That evening marked a milestone in their journey, a moment when Emily transitioned from being a survivor to becoming an advocate, a designer, and a changemaker. As the Catalyst Initiative grew, the demands on Sarah's time intensified. She found herself juggling her responsibilities as a mother, a leader, and an advocate. There were days when the pressure felt overwhelming, but Sarah had learned an important lesson. Finding balance wasn't about doing everything at once. It was about prioritizing the people and causes that mattered most. It had been nearly 5 years since that life-changing encounter with the homeless girl on the streets of New York, and Sarah had seen how far she had come, not just personally, but as a mother and a leader. The world had changed, and so had she. The girl who had been haunted by her past was now the woman who was creating a future, both for herself and for the millions who had been touched by her story. But Sarah's work was never truly done. There were still countries where homelessness was a hidden crisis. There were still communities where young people were suffering in silence. And Sarah was determined to continue the mission, no matter what it took. But her latest project was different. It wasn't just about shelters, it was about home. For the first time, Sarah was beginning to think about what it would mean to give people more than just a roof over their heads. It was about giving them a sense of belonging, of community, of family. In a meeting with Elon, they began to conceptualize a new phase of the Catalyst Initiative, one that would not just provide shelter but create an entire ecosystem of support. This ecosystem would integrate housing, education, emotional healing, mentorship, and employment, giving young people everything they needed to rebuild their lives from the ground up. We need to create a sense of stability and permanence, Elon said, his eyes alight with the same passion he had when he started the project. A home isn't just a place you live in. It's a foundation, and that foundation should be as strong and supportive as possible. Sarah nodded. It was a vision she could get behind, a vision that took into account not just the physical, but also the emotional needs of homeless youth. Months later, the Catalyst Initiative launched its first home village in a small town in California. The home village was a revolutionary concept that integrated self-sustaining housing with mental health services, educational opportunities, and employment training. The village was designed to look and feel like a real community. Each small home was equipped with the basics, but also featured spaces for gathering, learning, and growing. The idea was to create a place where people could feel safe, supported, and empowered. A place where they could rebuild their lives, one step at a time. Emily's designs were incorporated into the village's layout, with communal spaces that promoted connection and healing. It was a place that felt like home, not just because of the physical structure, but because of the people and the resources that surrounded it. "I think this is what home feels like," Emily said as they stood in the center of the village, watching young people gather for a community event. "This is what I've always wanted." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. She hadn't realized just how much this vision meant to her daughter, and how much it meant to all the youth who would now call this place home. The home village quickly became a model for future communities across the United States. Other countries began reaching out, eager to replicate the model in their own cities. As word spread, Sarah realized that they were no longer just fighting homelessness. They were reshaping the way the world thought about home and community. As the global network of the Catalyst Initiative continued to expand, new challenges arose. Not everyone agreed with the ambitious plans, and some were still resistant to the idea of offering long-term support. Critics questioned whether it was possible to sustain such a large-scale effort, while others argued that the focus should be on economic policies rather than social welfare. But Sarah had learned not to be discouraged by opposition. She understood that the road to lasting change was never smooth, and she had learned to use criticism as fuel to drive her forward. "I know there are obstacles," Sarah said during a live broadcast addressing critics, "but I also know that every person we help is a victory, and as long as we keep helping, we will win. This isn't just about charity. It's about creating lasting change, and that's something worth fighting for." Elon stood by her side, reinforcing her words. "We've seen what's possible when we come together," he said. "We're building a movement, and movements are unstoppable." As Sarah looked back on all that had been achieved, she reflected on how far she had come, from a woman struggling with homelessness to a leader who had transformed the lives of millions. She had faced hardship, loss, and doubt, but through it all, she had never given up on the belief that love, compassion, and community could heal even the deepest wounds. She had built something lasting, something that would continue to grow long after she was gone. In the end, the Catalyst Initiative wasn't just a charity. It was a movement of love, of hope, and of resilience. It was the story of people coming together to make the world a better place, one life at a time. And Sarah knew, in her heart, that they had only just begun. As the years rolled on, the Catalyst Initiative expanded in ways no one had ever imagined. The home village model became a global symbol for the future of homelessness, inspiring cities around the world to adopt similar programs. But while the movement had gained widespread support, it was also met with increasing scrutiny from those who doubted its sustainability or impact. To combat these criticisms, Sarah and Elon assembled a team of experts, sociologists, economists, and urban planners, to rigorously measure the results of the initiative. The data was clear. The long-term benefits of providing young people with stable housing, education, and emotional support far outweighed the costs. The return on investment was not just financial. It was social, as communities became more vibrant, productive, and resilient. With this data in hand, Sarah began to speak out more forcefully in the media, emphasizing the economic and social benefits of the Catalyst Initiative. "This isn't just charity," she told a packed auditorium at the UN. "This is smart investment. The question is not whether we can afford to support these young people, it's whether we can afford not to." Her speeches resonated around the world, prompting governments and private investors alike to pour funding into similar projects. The Catalyst Initiative was no longer just a grassroots effort. It had become a global movement. The first home village in California had been a pilot project, a proof of concept. But now, as the initiative gained traction, more villages were built in cities across the United States and internationally. In Canada, the UK, and parts of Europe, the idea of sustainable, community-driven housing for homeless youth took hold. In Australia, the government launched a partnership with the Catalyst Initiative to build home villages in major cities. And soon the program expanded into parts of Africa where poverty and homelessness were pressing concerns. In each village, the core values remained the same: self-sustaining housing, access to education and job training, mental health care, and a supportive community. But each village also took on its own character, shaped by the local culture, needs, and resources. In Paris, for example, the villages were designed to include arts programs for young people, while in Kenya, villages emphasized agricultural education and community farming. Sarah traveled to these new locations regularly, meeting with local leaders, overseeing construction, and ensuring that the principles of the initiative were being followed. While Sarah continued to manage the day-to-day operations of the Catalyst Initiative, Elon Musk's vision continued to expand. As a major investor in the project, Elon leveraged his resources and influence to push for broader change in the tech and infrastructure sectors. He worked on developing new technologies that could make housing more affordable and sustainable, such as 3D printed homes and solar-powered energy grids that could be integrated into each village. "The world doesn't need more temporary solutions," Elon said in a keynote speech at the World Economic Forum. "We need permanent, scalable solutions that can solve the problem of homelessness for good." His bold ideas became a cornerstone of the Catalyst Initiative's future growth. The integration of cutting-edge technologies into housing projects made them not only affordable but environmentally sustainable as well. This approach helped win over even more skeptics, proving that innovation could be part of the solution to poverty and homelessness. Elon's focus also shifted towards developing a network of businesses that could offer job opportunities to the youth coming out of the program. He partnered with tech companies, manufacturing plants, and educational institutions to create pathways to employment for young people who had once felt like society had left them behind. While the global success of the Catalyst Initiative was monumental, it was the impact on Sarah's family that kept her grounded. Emily, who had once been a homeless teen struggling to survive, had blossomed into a young woman of purpose. She was no longer just Sarah's daughter. She had become a key player in the initiative's design and outreach efforts, using her own experiences to guide new initiatives and provide mentorship to young people in the program. As the initiative grew, so did Emily's role. She started leading workshops for homeless youth, helping them navigate the emotional and practical challenges of transitioning from life on the streets to life in a stable community. "I want to show them that no matter where you come from, you can make something of yourself," Emily said during one of her talks. "I'm living proof." Sarah often found herself amazed at how far Emily had come. Not only had she overcome her own trauma, but she was also now helping others do the same. It was clear that Emily was becoming a leader in her own right, a role model to young people who had been through what she had. In a quiet moment one evening, as they sat together on the porch of one of the home villages, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in their lives. "You know," Sarah said softly, "I've always believed in the power of change. But watching you, I think you're the greatest change I've ever seen." Emily smiled, her eyes reflecting the light of the setting sun. "I think it's just the beginning," she replied. By now, the Catalyst Initiative had helped over 10 million young people worldwide. It had become a force to be reckoned with, not just in addressing homelessness, but in shifting societal attitudes about the potential of young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Sarah's phone rang one morning, an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. When she answered, it was a voice she recognized from years ago, a voice that had once been filled with fear and uncertainty. "Sarah, it's Emily," said the voice on the other end. "I just got off the phone with a potential investor in a new home village project. It's a big deal, and they want us to be involved." "Go for it, Sarah replied, her heart swelling with pride. "You're ready." In that moment, Sarah realized that her work was done, not in the sense that the movement was over, but that the next generation was now ready to carry the torch forward. Elon's vision, Sarah's persistence, and Emily's heart had transformed not just their lives but the lives of millions. And as Sarah sat back, watching the sun set on a new chapter of her life, she knew that the legacy they were creating would live on for generations to come. And the ripple effect, born from a simple act of compassion on a street corner years ago, would continue to reverberate through the world, changing lives forever. As the years passed, the Catalyst Initiative became more than just a charitable movement. It evolved into a global framework for solving the issue of homelessness, poverty, and youth empowerment. The infrastructure Sarah and Elon had painstakingly built continued to expand, reaching new corners of the world. The home village model was no longer a novelty, it was a cornerstone of social change. And yet, despite all the progress, Sarah remained acutely aware of the road still ahead. One crisp fall morning, Sarah sat in her office, surrounded by a team of architects, engineers, and social workers, all eager to discuss the next phase of the initiative. The home villages had been a success, but Sarah had a new vision. She wanted to go beyond housing. It was time to build communities that fostered connection, creativity, and real social mobility. "We're talking about more than just shelters," Sarah said, her voice steady but filled with excitement. "We're talking about the foundation for a new society, a place where young people don't just survive, they thrive." The room fell silent as her team absorbed the weight of her words. After a few moments, one of the architects, a woman named Claire, spoke up. "We've been exploring new designs that include spaces for art, music, and digital technology. We could incorporate these into the village model, creating a space where residents have the tools to build not just a career, but a passion." Sarah smiled. It was exactly the direction she had hoped for. She'd always known that creativity and self-expression were integral to healing. After all, it was Emily's own creative vision that had given birth to so many of the village designs. "That's exactly it," Sarah said, nodding. "Art, education, tech, those aren't just luxuries. They're necessities. We need to give people the space to find what makes them passionate about life again." The meeting was a turning point. From that day forward, the initiative began to shift its focus from just providing a roof to creating a culture of opportunity. It wasn't enough for people to have a safe place to sleep. They needed a reason to get up every morning and feel excited about their futures. In partnership with universities, local businesses, and creative professionals, the villages began to include cutting-edge learning hubs, music studios, and digital labs. Young people could not only work towards gaining employment, they could also explore their artistic talents, learn coding, or even start their own businesses. This model was transformative. No longer were the youth just recipients of aid. They became active participants in a movement that celebrated growth, creativity, and entrepreneurship. Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how far the initiative had come. She had once been on the streets, desperate to find a way out. And now, she was part of a global effort to help others do the same. Only this time, the emphasis was on lifting people out of the cycle of poverty for good, and not just through survival, but through empowerment. The story of the Catalyst Initiative was now being told in every corner of the world. Documentaries were made about Sarah's journey, highlighting the transformative power of kindness and the relentless drive of one woman who had set out to change the world. But it was more than just a personal story. It was a movement that inspired millions. Young people from all walks of life were participating in community service, volunteer work, and advocacy for the cause. It became clear that the Catalyst Initiative was not just about homelessness. It was about breaking down societal barriers, about creating opportunities, and about allowing people to redefine their futures. Emily, now a key leader in the initiative, traveled globally to share her story with others. "I used to think my life was defined by my past," she told audiences. "But now, I see that I can define my own future. And that's what the Catalyst Initiative gave me, the opportunity to rewrite my story." Sarah knew her daughter's words rang true for millions of young people. Emily's evolution from a girl without hope to a woman who was changing the world stood as a testament to the power of belief in oneself and in others. Elon Musk, always known for his boldness, had continued to evolve his own role within the initiative. With his support, New innovations were being developed that would reshape how we thought about housing and sustainability. The Solar City team was now working on an entirely new approach to powering the home villages, combining solar panels with cutting-edge storage solutions to create entirely off-the-grid, self-sustaining communities. It's not just about offering people a safe space, Elon said during a global conference. It's about offering them a sustainable one. And that means thinking beyond traditional solutions. We're looking at energy independence, water conservation, waste management, everything that will allow these communities to thrive for generations to come. The projects Elon supported were already showing early success. The solar-powered homes in the villages had drastically reduced costs, making them even more affordable for the families and youth who depended on them. And in the villages where technology played a key role, young people were learning how to design and manage the very systems that powered their homes. As Sarah looked out at the growing network of home villages, she saw a future that was no longer clouded by uncertainty. These were the beginnings of a new world, one where people didn't have to fight for their place, but could create their own path. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Sarah found herself in the quiet of her office, reflecting on everything that had happened. Emily had just finished her last workshop of the day, and Sarah was waiting to hear about the new developments from Elon's team. The success of the initiative was undeniable, and yet, Sarah knew that the true triumph was more personal than anything else. She had overcome the darkness of her past and turned it into light for so many others. But in doing so, she had also found her own healing. The work she did, the lives she helped, had given her purpose beyond herself. She no longer thought about the hardships she'd endured on the streets or the pain of losing everything. What mattered now was the future, the one they were all building together. Her phone buzzed with a message from Emily. "Mom, I'm so proud of you. Proud of us. I think we're really doing it." Sarah smiled as she typed back, "We're just getting started." And as she gazed out the window, watching the world continue to turn outside, she knew that the future was filled with endless possibilities. The journey had only just begun. As the momentum behind the Catalyst initiative grew, Sarah found herself at the center of not just a social revolution, but also a personal one. The global expansion, the partnerships with governments, and the unrelenting support from communities had turned the initiative into something far more influential than she ever imagined. But now, Sarah faced a new challenge: scaling the initiative to a level that could truly eradicate homelessness on a global scale. She sat in a meeting with Elon, Emily, and a group of high-profile philanthropists, social innovators, and tech moguls who had come to see the Catalyst initiative not just as a charitable cause, but as the key to a larger global shift. "The problem is no longer that people can't get off the streets," Sarah said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "The problem is that our systems are designed to keep them there. We need to break down these systems and offer a holistic solution that doesn't just focus on housing, but on real, sustainable change." Elon leaned forward, nodding. "I've always said that we need to think big if we want to make a real difference. Let's go beyond just building villages. Let's create cities." The idea was radical, even for Elon, but it made sense. Why limit the vision to villages when whole communities, complete with education systems, healthcare infrastructure, public services, and business ecosystems, could be built with the same principles in mind? These would be the cities of the future, entirely self-sustaining, designed to give everyone, not just the homeless, a fair chance at building a prosperous life. Elon proposed a new project, Catalyst Cities. These cities would combine cutting-edge technology, renewable energy, and innovative governance to not only solve the homelessness crisis, but also redefine what urban living could look like. The concept would integrate affordable housing with smart city technology, solar panels, vertical farming, 3D, printed homes, and even AI-driven resource management systems to optimize energy use and reduce waste. But there was another layer to Elon's plan. Catalyst cities would also be designed to nurture human connection. Public spaces would encourage collaboration, while cultural centers, art galleries, and creative workshops would foster community engagement and personal growth. The cities would be havens for creativity and entrepreneurship, where anyone, regardless of background, could have access to opportunities to shape their future. "This could be the blueprint for a new era," Sarah said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Imagine entire populations not just being housed but being empowered. They would no longer be seen as a drain on society, but as active contributors. Emily, who had always been at the forefront of the initiative's creative direction, was quick to jump on board. It's about offering a life, not just a roof. We can build environments that nurture talents, whether that's in coding, the arts, or even new ways of thinking about sustainability. The concept of a catalyst city was no longer just a distant dream. With the power of Elon's vast network, Sarah's leadership, and the backing of an ever-growing group of forward-thinking investors, they could now take the next step. Construction began on the first catalyst city in California. The site was vast, thousands of acres of land that had once been deemed uninhabitable. But with Elon's team of engineers, environmental scientists, and urban planners working around the clock, the land was transformed into a thriving ecosystem that provided everything residents needed. The first phase of the city included several key elements. 1. Affordable housing. Using sustainable materials and 3D printing technology, homes were built quickly, cheaply, and to high standards of safety and comfort. Each home was equipped with solar panels, efficient water systems, and smart technology to manage energy use. 2. Education and skill development. There were centers for coding, digital media, entrepreneurship, and vocational training, alongside traditional education facilities. Residents could gain skills for the modern economy while learning about sustainable farming, healthcare, and technology. 3. Health and well-being. Integrated mental health services, fitness centers, and counseling were embedded into every part of the city's design. Residents could seek help for emotional and psychological challenges while also benefiting from the supportive community around them. 4. Business and innovation hubs. Spaces for startups, social enterprises, and tech labs were dotted throughout the city. These hubs encouraged collaboration and experimentation, where residents could launch their own businesses or work on social projects that would directly benefit their communities. 5. Public spaces and green areas. The design included plenty of green spaces, community gardens, and cultural venues, ensuring that residents had room to play, relax, and connect. As the first catalyst city took shape, Sarah visited the site often, witnessing the slow but sure transformation. It was more than just the physical construction. It was the creation of a new way of life, one that celebrated the possibility of every individual. What struck her most was how quickly people adapted to the change. They were no longer viewed as projects or cases. They were citizens, members of a vibrant community that was about to embark on a shared journey of growth. In one of the first homes completed in the new city, a young woman named Tara stood in her living room, taking in the sight of her new life. She had been homeless for years, caught in the cycle of poverty and addiction, but now she was standing in her own home, looking out over the garden she had helped plant. "I never thought this could happen for me," Tara said, her voice full of disbelief. "I thought people like me don't get a second chance, but here I am." Her story was just one of many. Throughout the city, people who had once been discarded by society were now becoming pillars of their communities. They worked in the tech labs, ran businesses, and mentored other residents. It was clear that the Catalyst City model was a success, not just in terms of providing shelter, but in giving people the resources to rebuild their lives and realize their full potential. News of the Catalyst City spread like wildfire. Governments around the world took notice, and leaders from countries both rich and poor began reaching out to Sarah and Elon for guidance on replicating the model in their own nations. The movement that had begun with a single act of kindness, a moment when Elon Musk stopped his Tesla Motorcade to help a homeless girl, had turned into a global transformation. But as the cities grew, Sarah remained grounded. She had learned long ago that true change comes from empowering individuals, not just building systems. And in every corner of the new cities, from the classrooms to the workshops, from the streets to the communal spaces, the most important thing was clear. People, no matter their past, could always rebuild. And so, as Sarah looked toward the future, she knew the next chapter of her journey would be about continuing the ripple effect. One that began with a simple act of kindness but would echo across the world for generations to come. In the end, Sarah realized that her work wasn't just about building cities. It was about building a new world, one where hope, opportunity, and community were the foundation of every society. And that was the most powerful legacy she could leave. The success of the Catalyst cities was nothing short of revolutionary. What had once been an ambitious idea, a vision born from a single, life-changing moment, had now expanded into a global movement. Over the next several years, Catalyst cities began to sprout in cities across the globe, from the crowded streets of New York City to the remote corners of rural Africa, offering hope and new opportunities to those who had been left behind for far too long. The model wasn't just about providing homes or jobs. It was about rethinking what it meant to be human in a society that often viewed people as disposable. It was about creating a system where everyone, regardless of their background or past struggles, could find a place in the world. Sarah and Elon had spent months traveling, speaking to governments and international organizations, advocating for the adoption of the Catalyst City framework. And slowly but surely, governments began to take notice. While it wasn't easy to convince them that the old systems of welfare and charity were outdated, the results from the first Catalyst City were undeniable. In one of the new cities built in Europe, a young man named Luca had experienced his own transformation. He had grown up in a poor neighborhood, his family struggling to make ends meet. But when he was offered a chance to join a Catalyst City, he took it without hesitation. He learned about sustainable farming, worked alongside engineers in renewable energy, and began to envision a future where he could make a real impact. "I never thought I'd have this chance," Lucas said during an interview. "But now, I'm part of something bigger. This place gave me the tools to change my future. And now, I'm helping others do the same." These success stories became more than just individual triumphs. They were the proof that the Catalyst Cities model could work on a larger scale. Luca wasn't just a success story. He was one of many. There were hundreds like him, all over the world, whose lives had been radically transformed by the support and opportunities the cities provided. Sarah and Elon's vision was now clear to the world. It wasn't about creating new social systems. It was about empowering individuals. Their focus had shifted from merely solving a problem to reshaping society altogether. Instead of relying on government aid or charity, the Catalyst initiative emphasized self-sufficiency, innovation, and inclusion. One of the most important aspects of the Catalyst City model was its leadership. It wasn't about top-down authority, but about empowering the residents to take ownership of their community. Every Catalyst City had a council made up of individuals who had risen from adversity, people like Tara, Luca, and even Emily, who had taken on leadership roles in guiding new residents. They weren't just participants in the city's growth, they were its architects. Emily, Sarah's daughter, had become a key figure in the movement, not just as a creative director but as a visionary in her own right. She often spoke about how her mother's dedication had shaped her understanding of leadership. "When I look at my mom, I see someone who never stopped believing," Emily said during a keynote speech. She didn't just believe in the people she was helping, she believed in herself, too. And that's what made all the difference. Elon, too, had become an integral part of the leadership team, his expertise in technology and innovation guiding the creation of more efficient, sustainable systems. But what was most striking about his role was how much he had come to value the human element of the project. He wasn't just building machines or systems, he was building lives. "The future is built on the shoulders of those who take chances and make change," Elon often said in interviews. "We're creating a world where every person has a shot to define their own future, no matter where they come from." For Sarah, the most gratifying aspect of the Catalyst Cities was seeing firsthand how the initiative was beginning to eliminate homelessness. People weren't just given a home, they were given a future. They had access to education, employment, healthcare, and a supportive community. They had the tools to rebuild their lives. But even as she marveled at the progress, Sarah knew that their work was far from over. There were still millions of people who had not yet benefited from the initiative, and the road to a completely transformed world was long. Still, she remained hopeful. She had seen the impact of the initiative in real lives, in real communities. And that was enough to keep her going. "The fight isn't over," Sarah said in a speech delivered in front of a crowd of supporters and global leaders. "But we've already made history. We've already created something that will change the course of humanity. And we're not stopping until everyone has the chance to live the life they deserve." The impact of the Catalyst initiative was beginning to ripple through society in ways no one could have predicted. Traditional social welfare systems, which had been in place for centuries, were gradually being phased out in favor of self-sustaining, community-driven models. Governments started allocating funds to build new catalyst cities, seeing them as not just a solution to homelessness, but as a way to foster long-term growth and prosperity. As more catalyst cities were built, the global conversation began to shift. People no longer saw homelessness as a permanent condition. It was something that could be solved, that could be eradicated, if the right approach was taken. It was a monumental shift in mindset that would change the way society looked at poverty and inequality forever. Meanwhile, in the heart of the first catalyst city, Sarah and Elon continued to work alongside the residents, watching as the community flourished. They visited the schools, the businesses, and the health clinics, talking to the people whose lives had been transformed. One day, Sarah stood in the middle of a bustling marketplace in one of the cities, watching a group of young entrepreneurs sell handmade goods. Their smiles were wide, their confidence undeniable. For Sarah, this was proof that the world was finally changing. "We've done it," she whispered to herself. But the journey wasn't over. There were still millions to reach, millions who needed the same chance that the residents of Catalyst City had received. And with each new day, Sarah felt the call to keep going, to keep pushing, to make the world not just a place to survive, but a place to thrive. As the years rolled on, the Catalyst initiative continued to evolve and expand. And while Sarah and Elon were often in the spotlight for their groundbreaking work, they knew the real heroes were the people who had embraced the vision and made it their own. The true legacy of their work wasn't just in the buildings they had created, but in the lives they had changed and in the world they had reimagined. And so, as Sarah sat back and watched the next generation of leaders, innovators, and dreamers take charge of their own futures, she knew that the world had been irrevocably changed. What began with a single act of kindness had blossomed into a global movement that would shape the world for generations to come. The ripple of change had started, and it would continue to echo for the rest of time. The success of the Catalyst Cities initiative had reshaped the global landscape. But even in the face of triumph, there were new challenges on the horizon. As Sarah and Elon looked toward the future, they realized that the battle to end homelessness and inequality wasn't just about building more cities. It was about building lasting change at a global level, one that required addressing the root causes of poverty, injustice, and systemic oppression. Sarah found herself at a crossroads, a point where she had to ask herself, what's next? The cities were flourishing, the communities were thriving, but the world was still full of inequality. While the Catalyst initiative had proven that change was possible, the fight for justice wasn't won by infrastructure alone. It needed to be supported by policy, education, and a fundamental shift in how societies viewed wealth and opportunity. Sarah knew that, to truly make a global impact, they would need the support of governments and international organizations. For the initiative to spread beyond the borders of individual nations, it required policy changes, ones that would advocate for sustainable development, universal access to education, and equality in healthcare. Elon had always been the visionary, pushing boundaries with technology, but now he had come to realize that real change needed a broader approach. Technology and innovation, though vital, couldn't replace the need for systemic political and social reform. "We need more than just innovation," Elon told Sarah one evening over dinner, the weight of their discussion hanging between them. "We need to start looking at the structures that have kept people trapped in poverty for so long. The future we're building is a result of a combination of these efforts: technology, policy, and human compassion. But until we change the rules of the game, the playing field will remain uneven." Sarah nodded, fully aware of the obstacles ahead. For all the success of the Catalyst Cities, many countries were still locked in traditional ways of thinking. Governments often favored short-term solutions over sustainable ones, and political agendas frequently stood in the way of progress. But Sarah was never one to back down from a challenge. She began meeting with policymakers, social scientists, and economists to formulate a new vision, a comprehensive global strategy that would not only scale the Catalyst Cities model, but also push for long-lasting social change. She would need allies, and that meant convincing people that the problem of homelessness was a symptom of a larger systemic failure. One of Sarah's key realizations was the profound importance of education in this new vision. If people were to rise out of poverty and homelessness permanently, they needed to be given the tools to thrive. Education had always been central to the mission of the Catalyst cities, but now Sarah was thinking bigger. She envisioned a world where education wasn't just a chance to learn. It was a means to unlock new ways of thinking, new opportunities for collaboration, and, ultimately, new possibilities for changing the world. I've spent my whole life helping people get out of tough situations, Sarah reflected in a speech at a global education summit. But what if, instead of constantly fighting to get them out, we could teach them how to thrive in the first place? We need to create educational systems that aren't just about surviving. We need to teach people how to be resilient, to understand how systems work, and to use their own voices to change their reality. Elon stood by her side, his vision for education perfectly aligned with Sarah's. Education needs to be about more than memorization. It needs to be about empowerment. It should teach creativity, problem-solving, and critical thinking. These are the skills that will allow people to build better lives for themselves and solve the problems we face as a society. With a new sense of urgency, Sarah began working on a plan to overhaul global education systems, integrating practical life skills, sustainability, and leadership training into school curriculums. The goal wasn't just to teach students how to pass exams, it was to teach them how to build their future. As the Catalyst initiative expanded, it became clear that the most significant challenge wasn't just local, it was global. Sarah had always believed that the world's issues were interconnected. A problem in one country affected others. The fight for equality and justice wasn't contained by borders, it transcended them. She decided that it was time to launch the Global Coalition for Sustainable Development, GCSD, a collective of nations, corporations, nonprofits, and activists who would unite to address the key issues that kept people trapped in poverty. It was a bold initiative, one that would require cooperation on an unprecedented scale. But Sarah had seen firsthand what could be accomplished when people worked together for the greater good. The GCSD would focus on four main pillars. 1. Economic justice, ensuring equitable wealth distribution and access to economic opportunities for all people, particularly those in marginalized communities. 2. Education reform, providing universal access to quality education with an emphasis on critical thinking, sustainability, and resilience. 3. Healthcare access, ensuring that every person, regardless of their background, had access to affordable, high-quality healthcare. 4. Sustainability, developing and implementing eco-friendly technologies and systems that would not only benefit communities but also protect the environment for future generations. Sarah's vision for the GCSD was one of unity, a global effort to bring together the world's most influential leaders and changemakers to reshape the systems that had led to inequality and hardship for so long. As Sarah and Elon prepared to launch the GCSD, they faced a storm of opposition from powerful interests who feared the disruption of the status quo. Corporations that had benefited from the existing systems of exploitation, governments resistant to change, and individuals who profited from the divide all pushed back. But Sarah was undeterred. "I've seen what happens when people unite for a common cause," she said in a powerful address at the United Nations. "I've seen the power of hope, the strength of a community, and the resilience of the human spirit. And I'm here to tell you, this is only the beginning." The GCSD became a rallying cry for a new world, one where the future was built on principles of equality, sustainability, and opportunity for all. People from every corner of the globe began to rise up, demanding change, contributing their voices, and pushing for a better future. And through it all, Sarah remained steadfast, believing that true transformation would come not through technology alone, but through the collective effort of humanity working toward a common, noble goal. With the GCSD gaining momentum, the Catalyst initiative blossomed into something greater than anyone could have ever imagined. It was no longer just a solution to homelessness. It was the blueprint for a new era of cooperation, unity, and shared prosperity. The world had taken its first steps toward a future where no one would be left behind. And Sarah knew that, no matter the obstacles ahead, they were on the right path. The battle for a better world had just begun, and they were determined to see it through to the end. In the quiet moments, Sarah would often pause, reflecting on how far they had come. From that fateful moment when Elon had stopped his Tesla Motorcade for a homeless girl, to this global movement, she had seen her dreams unfold in ways she could never have predicted. But even with all they had accomplished, she knew the road ahead was long, and she was ready for it. The world that Sarah and Elon had begun to shape was not without its challenges. While the Global Coalition for Sustainable Development, GCSD, gained traction, it faced fierce opposition from various powerful sectors. Some resisted the changes because they stood to lose their privileges, while others feared the disruption of established systems that had long been in place. As Sarah and Elon worked tirelessly to advance the cause, they encountered pushback from governments, corporations, and even some sections of the media. Sarah had known that the road ahead would be fraught with obstacles, but the resistance she now faced was unlike any she had anticipated. The larger corporations that controlled much of the world's resources, including fossil fuel companies, pharmaceutical giants, and tech monopolies, saw the GCSD's mission as a direct threat to their power. These industries had thrived in an environment that valued profits over people, exploitation over sustainability. Now, with a global movement calling for change, they weren't just protecting their profits, they were fighting for their very existence. The wealth gap is widening at an alarming rate, Sarah said during a public address. For too long, a small group of individuals have been able to hold on to wealth at the expense of the planet and the people who have supported them. The Catalyst Initiative and the GCSD aren't just about redistribution, they're about fairness. Everyone deserves an equal chance to thrive. Her words resonated with millions, but they also ignited the ire of the elite. They began pushing back in ways that went beyond lobbying and policy manipulation. Media campaigns were launched to discredit Sarah, Elon, and the movement as a whole. The media painted them as idealists with unrealistic dreams, as naive crusaders who didn't understand the complexities of the world economy. "Where are the resources going to come from?" the headlines screamed. "What about the jobs that will be lost? Can we really afford this utopian vision?" It was in these moments of conflict that Sarah saw the true weight of their mission. She knew the cause wasn't just about fighting poverty or homelessness. It was about confronting an entire system that prioritized wealth over human life. As the Catalyst Initiative gained momentum, it started to shift the political landscape, too. Some governments, particularly in developing nations, embraced the vision wholeheartedly. They recognized the long-term benefits of the Catalyst Cities model and wanted to implement similar solutions in their own countries. These governments saw the movement not just as a way to address homelessness, but as a holistic solution to many of their nation's most pressing problems: unemployment, healthcare, and environmental sustainability. However, in wealthier nations, particularly those with entrenched political systems, the road to reform was far steeper. Sarah was invited to speak at international summits, but in many of those circles, her ideas were met with skepticism or outright hostility. Political leaders who had been in power for decades viewed the new approach as too radical, too risky, and not in line with the economic realities of their countries. "You can't just throw money at problems and expect things to change," one senator said during a televised debate. "You need to focus on economic growth, not social welfare systems. People should work for their own success, not rely on handouts." The criticism stung, but Sarah refused to be swayed. She knew that progress would not come from complacency. This wasn't about making minor adjustments to a broken system. It was about creating a new system altogether. "Sometimes the hardest thing to do is to reimagine the world," she said in her response. "But that's what we're doing. We're not asking for a handout. We're building something that will sustain future generations. If we don't make these changes, we are condemning ourselves to repeat the mistakes of the past." Elon, too, found himself facing mounting opposition. While he had long been seen as a visionary in the world of technology, his advocacy for the GCSD's principles of equality and sustainability alienated many in the tech world. Major corporations that had previously been his allies began distancing themselves, fearing that his association with social justice causes would harm their reputations. But Elon was undeterred. In fact, he saw the resistance as confirmation that they were on the right path. His company, Tesla, had already revolutionized the electric vehicle industry, and now he was focused on using technology to create solutions for the world's most pressing problems. "Technology is the tool we use to solve global challenges," Elon said in one of his rare interviews during this turbulent period. "We have the power to innovate our way out of many of the crises we face. But it's not just about making profits, It's about making the world a better place for everyone. Elon's approach to technological innovation was changing. No longer did he just focus on building products for the elite. Instead, he focused on creating solutions that could benefit the entire global population. His work on renewable energy technology, efficient agricultural systems, and advanced healthcare solutions became cornerstones of the GCSD vision. One of the most important projects he embarked on was the creation of sustainable energy grids that could provide electricity to even the most remote and impoverished regions of the world. By using his knowledge of solar technology and energy storage, Elon believed that they could provide affordable, clean power to areas where people had previously been left in the dark. "We have the technology to make every corner of the world energy self-sufficient," he said. "No one should go without power just because they were born in the wrong place." The pressure on Sarah and Elon was mounting, but in their darkest moments, they found strength in the very people they were fighting for. The residents of the catalyst cities and their advocates around the world were unyielding in their support. They knew the model worked because they had lived it. They had seen firsthand what could happen when people were given a fair chance to succeed. One day, as Sarah walked through one of the new cities, she was stopped by a group of former residents who had built new lives through the initiative. One woman, named Clara, approached Sarah, tears in her eyes. Clara had once been homeless, living on the streets of a major city, before being brought into one of the catalyst cities. Now, she owned a thriving cafe and was helping other women who had been in her position. "I never thought I could have a future," Clara said, her voice breaking with emotion. "But you made me believe again. You gave me a chance to live." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "This isn't just about giving you a future, Clara. It's about giving everyone that same chance." Clara's words echoed in Sarah's mind long after they had parted ways. It wasn't just about winning over politicians or corporations. It was about the people. And the people had spoken. As Sarah and Elon moved forward, they knew the fight was far from over. The resistance was fierce, but their resolve was stronger. Every victory, no matter how small, pushed the world closer to the future they dreamed of. And the road ahead was clearer than ever. With each passing day, Sarah felt the weight of her mission more acutely. This wasn't just about changing the world, it was about saving it. And she was prepared to fight for it, no matter the cost. As the months passed, the world seemed to be in the midst of a profound shift. The resistance, while strong, was beginning to show signs of cracking. Sarah and Elon's relentless push for change was making waves not just at the grassroots level, but also in the halls of power. Their vision for a sustainable and equitable future had inspired millions, and while there were still many who resisted, a growing number of global leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens were rallying behind their cause. The Catalyst Cities model was no longer a distant dream. It had become a movement, one that was impossible to ignore. It was at this critical juncture that the world's leaders were called to the first-ever global summit on sustainability, convened by the GCSD. The summit would bring together heads of state, influential business leaders, environmental activists, and innovators to discuss how to accelerate the transition toward a more sustainable, just, and inclusive world. The summit was held in New York City, and Sarah was invited to speak alongside Elon. Their speech was widely anticipated, and the global media turned its attention to the event. As Sarah took the stage, she was keenly aware of the stakes. The moment had arrived. This was their opportunity to shift the conversation from resistance to action, from division to unity. The room was filled with the world's most powerful people, but Sarah felt a quiet calm inside. She had spent her life preparing for this moment. She knew that change was inevitable, but it had to come from the heart. "Good morning," Sarah began, her voice steady but powerful. "We're standing at a crossroads, a moment in history where the choices we make will determine the future of humanity. This isn't about the survival of a few. It's about the survival of us all." She paused, letting her words sink in. "For decades, we've ignored the consequences of inequality, environmental destruction, and economic disparity. We've built systems that benefit only a select few, while the majority of the world struggles to survive. But today, we are here to make a different choice. Today, we are choosing the future of all people, not just the privileged few." The room was silent as Sarah continued, outlining the key pillars of the GCSD: economic justice, education reform, healthcare access, and sustainability. She spoke with conviction, her words resonating deeply with those in attendance. She didn't just present the catalyst cities as a solution. She framed them as a global necessity, a model that could be expanded and adapted to countries around the world. The catalyst cities aren't just places where people can find shelter and work. They are living laboratories for a better future. They are proof that we can do more than just survive, we can thrive. But for this vision to become reality, we need all of you. We need global cooperation, a collective effort to address the root causes of the crises we face. Together, we can rewrite the future. Her words hung in the air as the crowd absorbed the weight of her message. And then, in a moment of solidarity, Elon stepped forward. "We've seen what's possible when innovation meets purpose," Elon said, his voice echoing in the vast conference room. "We've built technology that's changing the world. But technology alone isn't enough. We need to create a world where everyone has access to the tools to succeed, regardless of where they come from, what they look like, or how much money they have. This is our moment to do more than just innovate. We need to innovate for the greater good." Elon's words were met with applause, and in that moment, it became clear that the summit was a turning point. Leaders who had once dismissed their ideas were now paying attention. The conversation had shifted from skepticism to possibility. The question wasn't if change would come, it was how quickly it would come. As the summit continued, it was clear that the world was on the brink of something transformative. Behind closed doors, heads of state began to broker new agreements, some committing to climate action, others agreeing to adopt elements of the Catalyst Cities model in their own countries. Many spoke of the need for more inclusive economic policies, education systems that prioritized equality, and a reimagining of healthcare that left no one behind. But while some embraced the vision with open arms, others still held tight to their old ways. The opposition was far from defeated, and the fight was not yet over. Powerful lobbies, entrenched interests, and political leaders who had thrived in the old systems were now more determined than ever to stop Sarah, Elon, and the global movement. The media, too, was divided. Some outlets hailed the summit as a historic moment, while others questioned the feasibility of such sweeping changes. There were whispers of uncertainty. Could the world really change this quickly? Could the economic systems that had been in place for centuries be overhauled in just a few years? But Sarah and Elon knew that they had no choice but to keep pushing forward. Every obstacle was just another challenge to overcome, and they had faced too much to give up now. In the aftermath of the summit, something unexpected began to happen. A new generation of young people, inspired by Sarah and Elon's vision, began to rise up. They were no longer willing to accept the old ways of thinking. They demanded change, not just from their leaders, but from themselves. They believed that the future wasn't something they had to inherit. It was something they could build. Social media campaigns spread like wildfire, with young activists and influencers sharing stories from the Catalyst Cities, calling for a global commitment to equality and sustainability. New grassroots organizations began forming, uniting people from all walks of life to push for systemic change in their communities. The energy was palpable. People were finally starting to realize that the future was not just in the hands of politicians or billionaires. It was in their hands, and they were ready to take action. As Sarah looked out over the bustling city from her office window, she felt a mix of emotions. The summit had been a success, but the road ahead was still long and uncertain. Change, she knew, would not come easily. It would require courage, persistence, and the collective will of millions. Yet, for the first time in a long while, she felt an overwhelming sense of hope. The vision she had fought for, the dream she had once shared with a homeless girl and a billionaire, was beginning to take shape. The world was slowly awakening to the possibility of something better. "We've come this far," Sarah whispered to herself, "and we're not stopping now." As she prepared for the next phase of their journey, she knew one thing for certain. The fight for a better world had just begun. And with every step they took, they were bringing that world one step closer to reality. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges, but Sarah and Elon had come to realize that the only true obstacle was believing it couldn't be done. And as long as they kept moving forward, the future was within their grasp. The Catalyst initiative had gained unprecedented momentum, but the global battle was far from over. As Sarah and Elon pushed forward with their vision, they encountered new, unforeseen challenges that tested both their resolve and their trust in the movement. The tipping point was close, but the path to victory was filled with distractions, betrayals, and shifting allegiances. In the wake of the Global Summit on Sustainability, Sarah and Elon had successfully garnered support from governments, corporations, and global citizens alike. Yet, as they had feared, not everyone had their best interests at heart. As the spotlight on the Catalyst initiative grew brighter, the powerful entities that had been forced to the negotiation table began to see their position threatened. For some, the movement represented the end of the status quo, an end to their power and wealth. Behind the scenes, influential figures began to quietly withdraw support. Some tried to sabotage the initiative by launching counter-campaigns, while others covertly pushed for policy changes that would dilute the effectiveness of the Catalyst Cities model. One of the most shocking moves came from a prominent tech company, once an ally of Elon's. They had joined forces with the GCSD to push for widespread adoption of renewable energy, but as the initiative gained ground, they started to push for profits over sustainable development. Sarah and Elon felt the first real tremor of betrayal when they discovered that the company had been lobbying against a major environmental policy Sarah had advocated for at the United Nations. The policy aimed to end fossil fuel subsidies and redirect those funds into clean energy infrastructure. "They've been undercutting us," Sarah said, pacing in their shared office. "I knew we'd face resistance, but this? They were supposed to be with us." Elon, ever the optimist, tried to keep the mood calm. "They're just scared. They know that if we succeed, their entire model gets disrupted. But they can't stop us. Not now." Despite his words, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of disappointment. It was one thing to face opposition from outsiders, but betrayal from within their own circle was a bitter pill to swallow. The growing fractures within the movement began to mirror the divisions taking place on the global stage. While some countries were eager to embrace the principles of sustainability and equality, others, particularly those with vested interests in traditional power structures, began pushing back with greater force. In the United States, an influential senator, once a vocal supporter of the initiative, came out publicly against the Catalyst Cities model. "We can't afford to throw billions of dollars into untested, utopian projects," she said during a televised debate. "We need practical solutions, not a dream." Her words carried weight, and media outlets quickly jumped on the narrative, framing the GCSD's ambitious goals as unrealistic. The senator's public challenge created a rift among those who had previously been aligned with Sarah's vision. It wasn't just about politics, it was about the fate of the world. Sarah wasn't sure how much more of this division she could take. The people who had once believed in her and Elon were now questioning the very foundation of the movement. Amidst the chaos, a tragedy brought Sarah and Elon back to their core mission. In a city where one of the Catalyst Cities had been implemented, a large group of homeless people, who had been transitioned into new housing, found themselves without the support they needed after an unexpected wave of economic instability struck the area. Jobs were lost, rents increased, and the social systems that had been built to protect them began to unravel. A devastating fire broke out in one of the new housing complexes, resulting in several casualties. The fire was quickly contained, but the aftermath was catastrophic. Many of the residents were left without homes, without jobs, and with nowhere to turn. Sarah and Elon immediately mobilized, but the incident sparked an intense debate on the limitations of their initiative. The media pounced, and critics called into question whether the Catalyst Cities model had been rushed, whether the resources had been allocated properly, and whether the movement could truly provide long-term solutions to such deep-rooted issues. In the midst of this turmoil, Sarah returned to the heart of what they were fighting for. She spent hours in the wreckage of the housing complex, speaking to the displaced families, listening to their pain, and reminding them that this setback was not the end of the journey. It was a turning point, a lesson that highlighted the need for better support systems, stronger community engagement, and a more robust infrastructure. "We will fix this," Sarah said, standing in front of the rubble. "This is just one chapter of the journey. We've built these cities from the ground up, and we will rebuild again, stronger this time." Elon, by her side, echoed her sentiment. "We'll use this tragedy as a lesson. We won't stop. We never stop." Just as Sarah and Elon began to regroup and plan their next steps, a shocking revelation turned their world upside down. A well-known whistleblower, once a part of the Catalyst Initiative's early development team, came forward with evidence of corruption within some of the initiatives that had been implemented in several cities. The whistleblower revealed that certain local governments, under pressure from corporate interests, had misappropriated funds that were meant to support the homeless populations. Instead, they had diverted the money into private accounts, siphoning off resources meant to create jobs, housing, and educational programs. The revelation sent shockwaves through the media, and the public's trust in the initiative began to falter. While Sarah and Elon had worked tirelessly to build a movement of transparency and integrity, it was clear that some individuals had abused that trust. Sarah was devastated. "We can't just sweep this under the rug. This is bigger than us," she said, pacing back and forth in their office. "We have to hold these people accountable, even if it means exposing our own failures." Elon, who had always been fiercely protective of the initiative, was quiet for a moment before speaking. "We will fix this. We'll rebuild from the ground up. But we have to act fast. If we don't act now, we risk everything we've fought for." They knew that this was a defining moment. The stakes had never been higher. Sarah and Elon had always believed that the movement they had started was bigger than themselves, but this scandal could undo everything they had built. Despite the crisis, Sarah and Elon knew that the only way forward was to confront the problem head-on. They publicly addressed the corruption allegations, apologizing to the people who had been affected and vowing to take immediate action. They launched an independent investigation, promising full transparency and accountability. "We are committed to ensuring that every resource, every dollar, is used to help the people who need it most," Sarah said during a live broadcast. "This is our promise to you, and we will deliver." As the investigation unfolded, the truth came to light. Those responsible were held accountable, and the movement began to rebuild its credibility. However, the road to regaining public trust would be long and challenging. Sarah and Elon knew that they could not afford any more missteps. But as they stood together in the aftermath of the scandal, they realized that this was the true test of their vision. The Catalyst Initiative wasn't just about overcoming external opposition. It was about facing the darkness within and emerging stronger for it. Their journey was far from over, but they knew they were on the right path. And with each challenge they overcame, they were one step closer to the world they had always dreamed of. The aftermath of the scandal had shaken the movement to its core. Despite Sarah and Elon's immediate action to address the corruption, the Catalyst Initiative was under intense scrutiny. The media, once their biggest ally, had turned into a relentless critic. Every decision was dissected, every word scrutinized. People were asking, could a movement built on ideals of transparency and justice truly recover from such a betrayal? As the news of the corruption investigation spread, protests erupted in multiple Catalyst cities around the world. Residents who had once seen the initiative as a beacon of hope were now questioning whether they had been misled. Skeptics in the media and political spheres had a field day, calling into question not only the legitimacy of the initiative, but also Elon and Sarah's leadership. "You promised us change," one protester shouted during a rally in Paris. "And now we're left with nothing but broken promises." For weeks, the air was thick with criticism, and the pressure on Sarah and Elon was immense. It wasn't just about fixing the financial mismanagement anymore. It was about restoring faith in their movement. Every town hall meeting, every speech they gave, felt like they were walking on eggshells, fearing another misstep. But in the midst of the chaos, Sarah found herself reflecting on the very heart of their mission. She had been here before, fighting for change in a world that seemed to resist it at every turn. And just like before, it wasn't the challenges they faced that defined them. It was how they responded. Determined to make things right, Sarah and Elon decided to take a bold step. Instead of hiding from the controversy, they would embrace it. They would take full responsibility for the failures, commit to rebuilding, and invite the global community to join them in fixing what had gone wrong. In a global broadcast that spanned continents, Sarah stood alongside Elon in front of a crowd of supporters, journalists, and world leaders. The moment was crucial. If they failed now, the movement they had built would collapse. If they succeeded, They would turn this moment of crisis into a powerful statement about accountability and resilience. "We've made mistakes," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "We built something that promised to change the world. But in doing so, we lost sight of some of the very values that made us start this journey. We promised transparency, integrity, and justice, and we fell short. For that, I apologize." Elon, standing beside her, nodded. The Catalyst Initiative was never just about us. It was about the people, the communities who trusted us to create a better future. "We've let some of you down, and for that, we are sorry. But we're committed to fixing what was broken. We will do better." Sarah's words were followed by an unprecedented move. They announced the creation of a global task force, a group of independent experts, community leaders, and activists, to audit every project, every initiative, and every dollar that had been spent. This task force would ensure that there would be no more corruption, no more mismanagement, and no more broken promises. "This isn't the end of the Catalyst Initiative," Elon continued. "This is the beginning of a new chapter, one where we listen, learn, and rebuild together. It's time for a new level of transparency. It's time for us to earn back your trust." The speech marked a turning point. The Global Task Force's creation was met with a mixture of skepticism and hope, but many saw it as a powerful step toward redemption. In a world that often ignored its flaws, Sarah and Elon had chosen to confront theirs head-on. The global response was immediate. While some critics continued to decry the Catalyst Initiative as a failed experiment, others rallied behind Sarah and Elon's willingness to take responsibility and fix the mistakes. The movement wasn't over. It was evolving. In the weeks that followed, the Catalyst Initiative launched a series of town hall meetings across the globe, inviting citizens to participate in open discussions. These meetings allowed residents to voice their concerns, ask tough questions, and suggest improvements. They were no longer just followers of a movement. They were active participants in its evolution. For the first time, Sarah felt a true sense of connection with the people they had aimed to help. The criticisms were still there, but they were accompanied by a renewed sense of unity. People didn't want to give up. They wanted to fight for a better future together. And for the first time since the scandal broke, Sarah felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a driving force. The task force worked around the clock, auditing the financials, meeting with local governments, and assessing every project that had been put in place. Meanwhile, Sarah and Elon focused on rebuilding relationships with the community. They visited several Catalyst cities in person, speaking with residents, listening to their stories, and committing to real, tangible changes. It became clear that the scandal had exposed weaknesses in the model, areas that had been rushed or underfunded. The Catalyst cities were still the right idea, but they needed more infrastructure, more community-driven solutions, and more accountability at the local level. One of the first changes was to implement an enhanced feedback system for residents. Instead of top-down decision-making, residents would have a direct voice in shaping the policies that affected them. They would be empowered to suggest solutions, vote on key initiatives, and hold their local leaders accountable. "People need to feel that they have ownership over their future," Sarah said during a visit to a Catalyst city in Brazil. "We've been too focused on creating solutions for people, but we haven't done enough to ensure that people can create solutions for themselves." As the months passed, the Catalyst Initiative slowly began to rebuild. New policies were implemented, stronger oversight was established, and communities began to see the benefits of a more inclusive, transparent approach. Meanwhile, around the world, the movement continued to grow. The model for Catalyst cities had been tested, refined, and improved. It was no longer just a vision for a few. It had become a template for sustainable, equitable development that was gaining traction in countries all over the world. More governments began to adopt the Catalyst Cities framework, not just for the sake of sustainability, but for social justice, economic equality, and community empowerment. The movement had sparked a global conversation, one that challenged the status quo and demanded change. And as Sarah and Elon looked at the progress they had made, they knew the road to redemption had been long and difficult, but it had also been transformative. The movement they had started was now truly a global force, and they had learned the most important lesson of all. Change was possible, but it had to be built on trust, accountability, and the willingness to face the hard truths. The battle was far from over, but Sarah and Elon had come to realize something fundamental. The fight for a better world wasn't just about building catalyst cities. It was about building a world where everyone, no matter their background, could have a voice, a future, and a chance to thrive. As the Catalyst initiative moved forward, it wasn't just about achieving their vision. It was about evolving and growing alongside the very people they sought to help. Together, they had proven that even in the darkest moments, redemption was possible, and the journey toward a better future had only just begun. The world was watching. The Catalyst initiative had faced a crisis, but with accountability, transparency, and a renewed focus on community involvement, Sarah and Elon had set a new course for the future. Yet, as they continued to rebuild, they knew the challenges would not stop there. The global movement had gained momentum, but the true test lay in keeping it sustainable, adaptable, and impactful over the long term. Sarah and Elon spent countless hours refining the initiative's goals. They knew that the success of the Catalyst Cities model depended on more than just fixing the immediate issues. It was about creating a vision that could withstand changing global conditions. They began to explore new avenues for innovation that could complement the sustainable development model they had put into place. Elon, ever the innovator, had begun pushing for new technological advancements that could further enhance the Catalyst Cities. "We need to integrate cutting-edge technology into every facet of these cities," he said, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "We've already proven that we can create a sustainable city, but now we need to push the envelope on things like autonomous energy grids, AI-powered waste management, and smart healthcare solutions." While Sarah was always cautious about over-relying on technology, she could see the potential for these innovations to revolutionize the infrastructure of Catalyst Cities. The possibility of using AI to manage energy distribution more efficiently, for example, was an exciting prospect. It could reduce waste, lower costs, and improve the quality of life for residents. However, Sarah was quick to remind him that any technological advancement had to be aligned with the core values of the movement: equity, inclusivity, and transparency. "We can't let technology become the focus. The people need to remain at the heart of this," she insisted. "We need to use innovation to support, not replace, the communities we're building." Elon nodded, understanding that the human element of the Catalyst Cities was paramount. They agreed that the initiative would continue to evolve, embracing new technology while ensuring it enhanced the quality of life for every individual in the community, not just the privileged few. As Sarah and Elon worked on refining their vision, the Catalyst initiative began to see the fruits of their efforts. The global task force had helped rebuild trust, and the movement was now gaining traction in places where it had previously struggled to take root. Several new Catalyst Cities had been established in regions with limited access to sustainable infrastructure, including parts of sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. The new cities were designed with lessons learned from past challenges. The focus was not only on providing homes and jobs, but on creating long-term sustainability by fostering local leadership. These new cities were built in partnership with the residents, who had a say in everything from the layout of the neighborhoods to the types of businesses that would thrive there. In Africa, one new Catalyst City was taking shape near a region rich in natural resources. However, instead of extracting those resources for profit, Sarah and Elon had worked with local leaders to create a sustainable model that would ensure the land's resources benefited the people directly. They focused on solar energy farms, sustainable agriculture, and educational programs that empowered the community to be self-sufficient. "These people have the knowledge and skills to thrive," Sarah said during a visit to the site. "What they need is the support to unlock their potential." Elon, visiting the same site with her, added, "And we need to make sure that these cities aren't just about providing for today. We're creating opportunities for the future." The expansion of the Catalyst Cities was having a ripple effect across the globe. Other nations, inspired by the success of the initiative, began rethinking their approach to urban development. In Europe, a group of countries announced their plans to replicate the Catalyst Cities model, with a focus on integrating renewable energy and green infrastructure. Even in regions that had initially opposed the idea, there were signs of change. Local governments began to adopt policies inspired by the movement, and more corporations aligned themselves with the principles of sustainability and equality that the Catalyst initiative had championed. We're seeing the effects of a true paradigm shift, Elon remarked as they watched reports of the expanding movement in their headquarters. What started as a few cities is becoming a global movement. The Catalyst Initiative was now more than just an idea. It was a model for a new kind of future, a future where cities were built for the people, by the people, with sustainability at their core. And as more countries embraced the model, it was clear that the world was on the brink of a transformation unlike anything it had ever seen. As the movement grew, Sarah and Elon began to realize something crucial. It was no longer enough for them to simply be the faces of the initiative. Their vision had caught the attention of political leaders, CEOs, and activists all over the world, and they needed to ensure that the Catalyst Initiative could stand on its own, independent of any single leader or figure. To this end, they began working on the next phase of the initiative, establishing a new global leadership council. This council would include a diverse group of individuals, policymakers, environmentalists, economists, and community leaders. Together, they would guide the future of the Catalyst Initiative, ensuring it remained focused on its core values of sustainability, equity, and community empowerment. "We need to build a team of people who truly represent the global movement," Sarah said one evening as they discussed the plans. "We've come a long way, but this has always been about more than just Elon and me." Elon agreed. "It's about creating a foundation that can outlast us, one that will continue to grow, adapt, and evolve long after we're gone." Months passed, and the Catalyst Initiative continued to evolve. The cities were thriving, the new Global Leadership Council was taking shape, and the world was starting to see the tangible effects of a vision that had once seemed impossible. In a catalyst city in Japan, children were attending schools powered entirely by renewable energy, while in India, women were leading community-driven projects that focused on sustainable agriculture. Across Africa, new industries were being born, and millions of people were beginning to experience the benefits of the initiative firsthand. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was cultural. People everywhere were beginning to understand that sustainability wasn't just about protecting the environment. It was about protecting the future of every individual. It was about creating a world where people could thrive, no matter their background, no matter their circumstances. And as Sarah and Elon watched these changes unfold, they realized something profound. They had done it. They had created a movement that had not only survived but had thrived, and they had brought the world one step closer to the future they had always dreamed of. But the journey was far from over. There was still work to be done. There were still challenges to overcome. But with each passing day, the Catalyst Initiative proved that change, no matter how difficult, was always possible. And as they stood on the balcony of their headquarters, looking out at the horizon, they knew that the world was ready for whatever came next. The future was bright, and it was theirs to shape. With the foundation of the Catalyst Initiative secure, Sarah and Elon now turned their focus to the next chapter of their story. A world not just transformed, but thriving in ways they had once only dreamed of. Despite the momentum of the Catalyst Initiative and the global recognition it had garnered, Sarah and Elon knew that the future was never guaranteed. The world was a vast and complex place, and while they had made significant progress, they were still standing at the edge of a much larger challenge: how to ensure the long-term sustainability of their vision in the face of unpredictable global crises and growing resistance from powerful forces. The world, while largely inspired by the success of the Catalyst Initiative, was also in a state of flux. The geopolitical landscape had shifted as countries began to realize the power of sustainable urban development and the benefits of inclusive growth. However, some governments, especially those with economies based on fossil fuels and industrial practices, remained steadfast in their resistance to change. In some regions, traditional industries saw the catalyst cities as a threat to their bottom lines. Elon often said that every revolution faced opposition from those with the most to lose. And he wasn't wrong. In key energy-producing nations, there were factions trying to discredit the movement, using propaganda and misinformation to stir public doubt. This is just another Silicon Valley experiment, they argued, doomed to fail like all the others. To combat this, Sarah knew the movement needed to be more than just an alternative. It had to be an irrefutable force for good, a movement that could stand up not only to its critics but to the status quo. Sarah and Elon were acutely aware of the growing political divide on the issue of sustainability. In some countries, sustainability was no longer seen as a choice, it was a necessity. In others, particularly those with entrenched industries, environmentalism was a contentious political issue. In the United States, a polarizing election cycle had created deep divisions. The political landscape was more fractured than ever, and both major parties were grappling with the role of corporations in shaping public policy. The Catalyst Initiative found itself caught in the middle of this ideological war, with political leaders from both sides either embracing or rejecting its model depending on their respective interests. Sarah often felt the tension when speaking to world leaders. "You're pushing for something too radical," one senator had said. "You're asking us to rewrite the entire economic structure of our country. It's a non-starter." But Sarah knew that true progress could not come from playing it safe. "If we keep waiting for the perfect political climate, we'll never get anywhere," she said. "We need to act now. The world is changing, and if we don't change with it, we risk falling behind." And so, she pushed on, knowing that sometimes the most difficult battles were fought within the walls of politics. As the Catalyst Initiative grew, so too did public interest and scrutiny. There were millions of people who supported the vision, but as with any movement, the pressure of constant visibility was mounting. Every decision, every misstep was amplified, and the public's expectations were sky-high. "The world's watching us," Elon often said, a reminder of the weight of their actions. For Sarah, it was both exhilarating and exhausting. The pressure to live up to the expectations was immense. Every new Catalyst city that opened felt like a small victory, but every failure, every hiccup, seemed like a personal loss. There were even moments when she doubted whether they could truly achieve the monumental changes they had set out to accomplish. But the most difficult challenge came when public perception of the initiative began to sour, not due to any failure of the movement, but because of the rapid pace at which it was spreading. The success of the Catalyst Initiative created a wave of imitation. Other organizations, cities, and governments began launching their own versions of Catalyst cities, but many did so without the same level of transparency and commitment to equity that Sarah and Elon had championed. This proliferation of imitation initiatives created confusion and a dilution of the movement's original message. The media, always hungry for drama, quickly picked up on the growing debate. Were these new cities really part of the Catalyst Initiative? Or were they just using the brand name for their own agendas? Were they the same, or had they lost their soul? Some of these projects are just trying to make a quick buck off the success of the Catalyst model, one journalist said in an op-ed. They're far from the original vision. We need to ask, is the Catalyst Initiative just a brand, or is it still about change? Sarah knew she had to address this confusion head-on. We need to make it clear that the Catalyst Initiative is not just a set of ideas. It's a framework, a philosophy. And that means it's about far more than just putting up green buildings or building fancy solar farms. It's about creating communities where people truly have ownership and a voice. That's what makes us different. That's what makes us real. She and Elon began working to redefine the Catalyst brand, emphasizing that the initiative's success lay not in the physical infrastructure alone, but in the systems they had put in place to empower people. Meanwhile, external challenges threatened to undo some of the progress they had made. The climate crisis, which the Catalyst Initiative was working to address, was intensifying. More frequent natural disasters were occurring worldwide, and regions with Catalyst cities were no exception. One devastating hurricane hit the Caribbean, causing widespread flooding in one of the first Catalyst cities. Despite the city's sustainable design, the sheer force of the storm overwhelmed its infrastructure. Buildings designed to withstand average storms were damaged, and the city's emergency response systems faced enormous strain. "Elon, we can't predict when these events will happen," Sarah said during one particularly tense evening, "but we need to be ready for the worst-case scenarios." The hurricane highlighted a critical flaw. While Catalyst cities had been designed with sustainability in mind, there were still gaps in their disaster preparedness systems. They weren't just designed to endure the everyday challenges of energy consumption and waste management. They also needed to withstand increasingly extreme weather events brought on by climate change. Sarah and Elon realized that they needed to rethink their approach to disaster management. They called together experts from around the world to help design solutions that would fortify Catalyst cities against future environmental threats. This meant designing cities that were not only green and sustainable, but also resilient to the unpredictable forces of nature. And then there were the economic shifts. As global economies evolved in response to climate change and the growing need for sustainable industries, traditional industries faced pressure to adapt or collapse. The move toward renewable energy was accelerating, and many fossil fuel companies found themselves at odds with the growing push for sustainability. Elon knew these companies would fight back, sometimes with misinformation campaigns, other times by funding opposition. Economic disruption is inevitable, he said during a strategy session. But we need to make sure that the transition is fair for everyone. We can't leave people behind. As the year drew to a close, Sarah and Elon found themselves deep in discussions about the next steps. They were no longer just leaders of a movement. They were also strategists, navigating a shifting world filled with obstacles and unpredictable forces. They knew that the foundation they had built for the Catalyst initiative was strong, but it needed to be reinforced with adaptability, resilience, and a greater focus on long-term sustainability. We've learned a lot, Sarah said, but the hardest part is still ahead. We need to keep pushing forward, even when the world feels uncertain. Because that's what change requires, persistence. Elon agreed, his eyes filled with the determination that had always defined him. Change is never easy, but it's always worth it. And together, we can make it happen. With the challenges ahead, Sarah and Elon knew that the road to a truly sustainable, equitable world would not be without its difficulties. But they also knew that they were not alone. They had the support of millions who believed in the same vision. And that, more than anything else, was what would carry them through the storm. The next chapter of the Catalyst initiative had only just begun, and Sarah and Elon were prepared to face whatever came next, together. After years of building, overcoming obstacles, and reshaping the world's approach to sustainable development, Sarah and Elon found themselves at a crossroads. The Catalyst initiative had proven to be a powerful force for change, but its journey was far from complete. With the dawn of a new era, they understood that their vision for a better world was now taking on a life of its own. The challenges had been many, but the lessons learned were invaluable, and the road ahead was brimming with possibilities. The Catalyst initiative was now not just a series of cities or a global program. It had become a global movement. From major urban centers to small rural communities, people were beginning to recognize that the future of the planet rested in their hands. Sarah and Elon had started something that had sparked a chain reaction. Governments, corporations, and communities across the world were embracing the principles of sustainability, inclusivity, and innovation. One of the most significant changes was the way that different sectors were now working together. The Catalyst Cities model had proven to be scalable, and countries were incorporating aspects of it into their urban development plans. In the United States, even states with conservative leanings had passed policies supporting renewable energy and green infrastructure, in part because of the undeniable success of the Catalyst Cities model. Elon, always pushing for the next frontier, had already begun developing plans for Catalyst 2.0, a new iteration of the cities, this time integrating the very latest in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and biotechnologies. But Sarah, grounded in the principles that had made the first iteration so successful, was more cautious. We can't let technology overshadow our human-centered mission, she insisted. These cities have to stay true to what we set out to achieve in the first place. It's about people. It's always been about people. Elon smiled, respecting her perspective. I agree. But imagine cities where everything, from healthcare to education to energy, is managed by systems that learn, evolve, and adapt. It could make our cities even more resilient. It was clear that they were facing an exciting new chapter, one that would require them to balance innovation with the lessons they had learned. As they looked ahead, they knew the next step wasn't just about technology. It was about building stronger, more connected communities. Despite the movement's success, Sarah and Elon understood that there were still people who were left behind by the rapid pace of change. In many regions, the Catalyst Cities model had transformed the landscape, but there were still rural areas and marginalized communities that had not seen the benefits of the initiative. They needed to ensure that the movement was equitable across all sectors of society. The world is changing, but we have to make sure that no one is excluded from this transformation, Sarah said during a meeting with the new Global Leadership Council. We can't allow this initiative to become something only the rich or powerful benefit from. We have to prioritize the underserved. Elon agreed, but he also emphasized that some of the most exciting potential lay in empowering the people who had been traditionally left out of the conversation. We're not just talking about buildings and energy systems, he said. We're talking about opportunity. The power of the Catalyst Initiative isn't just in what we build. It's in what we enable people to do. As Sarah and Elon continued to shape the future of the Catalyst Initiative, they also recognized the importance of fostering a new generation of leaders. Over the years, the initiative had drawn young, passionate individuals from all corners of the globe, people who were dedicated to solving the world's most pressing problems, from climate change to economic inequality. These young leaders were now stepping into positions of power, both within the Catalyst network and in their own governments and organizations. Some were taking the lead on new projects, while others were using the principles of the Catalyst Cities model to influence policies in their home countries. One of the most exciting developments was the rise of local leaders in the cities that had been built. These leaders, empowered by the Catalyst framework, were beginning to take on key roles in managing the city's growth and operations. In Catalyst cities around the world, citizens were now actively involved in the decision-making processes, from budget allocation to community development initiatives. This is what we wanted, Sarah said, as she reviewed reports from around the world. We wanted people to take ownership, to feel like they had a stake in their future. Despite the success of the Catalyst Initiative, Sarah and Elon never lost sight of the fact that the world was still facing an existential climate crisis. Global temperatures were rising, ecosystems were under threat, and inequality was still rampant. The Catalyst Cities model had made a significant dent in the global climate crisis, but there was still much to be done. As Sarah walked through one of the cities in Southeast Asia, where green rooftops covered every building and solar panels lined the streets, she felt both pride and apprehension. The progress they had made was undeniable, but she knew that the next phase would be even harder. Climate change was accelerating, and the world needed more than just sustainable cities. It needed a global shift in how every nation approached environmental stewardship. Elon, ever the visionary, was already planning the next major step. He had been in discussions with global leaders about establishing an international sustainability council, which would bring together governments, corporations, and NGOs to work towards the next phase of climate solutions. The goal was clear: to build a globally coordinated effort to reverse environmental degradation and tackle inequality on a systemic level. If we want to truly change the world, Elon said, we can't do it alone. We need every country, every industry, every community to be on board. This is a global fight, and the next decade is critical. As the Catalyst Initiative continued to grow and evolve, it was clear that the work of Sarah and Elon had touched the world in ways they could never have imagined when they first started. What had begun as a single moment of kindness, a decision to stop the Tesla motorcade for a homeless girl, had sparked a movement that transcended borders, industries, and generations. The initiative had transformed the very idea of what a city could be. It had given people hope for a future that was inclusive, sustainable, and driven by purpose. And while the journey had been filled with challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt, the vision was alive, and it was thriving. As Sarah and Elon stood side by side, watching the sun set over one of the first Catalyst cities, they knew they had created something that would last for generations. The future was no longer just a dream. It was a reality that had been built, piece by piece, by the people who had dared to imagine a better world. And though they had come so far, they both knew this was just the beginning. The true impact of their work would be felt for years to come, and it was up to the next generation to carry the torch forward. The future was theirs to shape. And so, the Catalyst Initiative lived on, a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of human ingenuity and compassion, and a promise that a better world was not only possible but within reach.